room was almost dark. A single candle. A man who had outlived his own future. Remus Lupin sat alone at a crooked table, in a rented room that smelled of damp wood and old ink. Wax bled down the candle like a slow, exhausted wound, throwing light over scarred hands folded on the grain, over a wand worn smooth by years of careful, necessary magic, over a battered suitcase that had been packed and unpacked since the First War and never truly emptied. Tonight, we explore the life of the kindest teacher Harry ever had, and the one wizard the war truly broke. Outside, the world believed it was at peace. Voldemort was gone. The famous child was alive. The grave in Godric's Hollow was full. That was the story. That was the truth everyone thought they knew. But in this darker version of the tale, another question hangs in the air like smoke. What if the grave was empty? What if James and Lily Potter had not died, but vanished behind a forbidden charm and a perfect replica, leaving their son and their friends to grieve ghosts that were never there? This is important, because if the deaths of James and Lily were only a plan, a terrible, calculated mercy, then someone's life would have been twisted beyond recognition by that lie. Not Dumbledore, who had always lived with secrets and necessary deceptions. Not Hagrid, who had carried the infant from the ruins and found new purpose in loving the boy. Not Sirius, who had no life left to twist, locked away in Azkaban with his howling. No, no one would have been more destroyed than Remus Lupin, the man who already believed he had lost everything. In the books, we first meet him as a calm, shabby professor dozing in a Hogwarts Express compartment. A quiet figure who will teach Harry the Patronus charm and stand between a boy and his worst memories. In this telling, that same scene is a mask. He walks into that train carriage carrying decades of grief and poverty and betrayal on his shoulders, every step haunted by an unseen alternate history in which even his mourning might be false. The suitcase at his side is not just luggage, it is a traveling graveyard of letters, photographs, and empty spaces where answers should be. Before Remus ever met Harry, the war had already taken almost everything from him. Fenrir Greyback had taken his childhood, tearing into him under a cold, indifferent moon. The curse had taken his humanity, turning each month into a locked room of bone and blood. The First War had taken his friends, James and Lily to a killing curse, Peter to supposed death, Sirius to Azkaban and infamy. His condition had taken his future, closing doors to work, to home, to love, until he lived in the margins of his own life. If the Potters' deaths were a lie, then even his grief was stolen from him. What happens to a man when he discovers that the only solid ground he ever trusted was another layer of deception? Lily was a charms prodigy, and in this universe her brilliance does not end at a nursery door in Godric's Hollow. Somewhere far from this dim room, she and James are alive and hidden, their plan unfolding in the shadows. Remus does not know. He only feels the hollow ache of their absence and a quiet, corrosive suspicion that he somehow survived by mistake. Across this video, we will move slowly, almost mercilessly, through his life, from the quiet horror of a bitten child through the golden years of the Marauders into war, betrayal, and a thin, brittle peace that followed. We will revisit the Shrieking Shack, the Order's meetings, the moment he stands before Harry with a silvery wolf bursting from his wand, and we will ask, again and again, what if the story Remus believed was never true? The candle in his room is burning low. The unraveling is about to begin. The candle in his room is burning low. Outside, the world still believes in safe categories: monster and man, light and dark, grave and cradle. Inside a small cottage on the edge of Muggle Fields, a boy named Remus Lupin is still whole. For the moment. His early life is almost painfully ordinary. A narrow lane, hedges grown wild, a roof that leaks in autumn storms. A father who walks each morning to the ministry, coat buttoned, case in hand, convinced that magic can be regulated into reason. A mother who patches robes and hums over the kettle, and a child who reads. Remus lives in books the way other children live in games, tracing the edges of every story as if the printed words might be a charm against the unknown. Lyle Lupin believes the unknown can be classified, contained, written down in tidy memoranda. He believes, with the certainty of a minor functionary who has never yet been tested, that the monsters belong in files and fairy tales. This is important, because when he stands in a ministry hearing and calls werewolves soulless, vile creatures, he thinks he is naming a danger, not inviting it into his son's bedroom. Fenrir Greyback hears the words. He hears the contempt, the easy moral superiority, the implication that a creature like him is less than alive, less than human, less than anything that might ever be loved. And he makes a plan, not to argue, not to petition, to mark the man where he is weakest, to turn a child's body into a living, bleeding replica of Lyle's mistake. The night of the attack is not dramatic at first. No storm, no prophecy, only a too bright moon and a cottage settling into silence. The window latch carelessly left uncharmed. The soft creak as it lifts. The smell arrives before the sound: damp fur, earth, iron, a copper tang that Remus will later associate with his own blood. Then weight on the mattress. A shadow that is all teeth and breath. The grave was empty, but something far worse has come to lie beside him. He does not even manage a full scream. It is cut off by the jaws that close on his shoulder, by the white flash of pain that wipes out the room, his name, the story of who he was 5 seconds before. This is not an accident. It is a message written in flesh. Healers arrive. They can knit skin, smooth bone, clean the shredded edges of the wound until his parents almost dare to hope. But they cannot undo a curse that has already seeped into marrow. Each full moon from that night forward is a sentence carried out again. A locked room, muffled howls, a boy who learns to fear his own breathing because it always precedes the change. His parents age in a season. Lyle's shoulders curve inward as if trying to fold around a guilt that will not be contained. Hope clings to small, desperate plans. Perhaps there is a new charm, a forgotten potion, a loophole in the law. There is not. Remus understands before they say it aloud. He is dangerous now, not in theory, but in calendar squares circled in red. Children stop visiting. Neighbors stop asking. The garden grows wild while the house turns inward, a fortress built not against invaders, but against the boy at its center. Love remains, fierce and terrified, but it is threaded with calculation. Who can be near him when, under what wards? From the beginning, affection is measured against risk. This is the pattern that shapes him. He learns that words spoken in a distant chamber can tear open his skin, that his existence can be used to punish the people he loves, that his own body is a battlefield on which other men settle their grudges. Later, when friendship comes, when trust and betrayal and war circle him like phases of another darker moon, he will already know the lesson the night taught him. Nothing given to him is ever safe. The candle in his room gutters. Somewhere beyond the fields, beyond the cottage and its quiet despair, a headmaster at Hogwarts is already considering an impossible accommodation. Not Dumbledore, who had once believed the school could not house a monster, but Dumbledore, who will decide that this particular monster is a child worth breaking the rules for. The next chapter of Remus's life is already moving toward him, on tracks laid by pity, ingenuity, and a very specific kind of hope. But before Dumbledore's decision, before Hogwarts became a possibility, whispered in grown-up voices, there was a house that had to be rebuilt around a single terrible fact. The boy inside it was no longer simply a boy. The Lupin home changed first in wood and iron. Doors were reinforced with bolts that shone too new against old frames. A hidden cellar space appeared beneath a rug in the sitting room, its edges always slightly misaligned, as if the house itself disliked the deception. On the kitchen wall, a calendar hung like a quiet threat. Every full moon circled in red so dark it might as well have been dried blood. Time itself had been turned into an enemy. This is important. The days were no longer measured in lessons or games, but in the distance to the next night, when their child would not be entirely alive in his own skin. They whispered about money after they thought he was asleep. Wolfsbane did not yet exist, but there were potions for recovery, charms for restraint, salves for torn flesh. Each vial was expensive. Each month they weighed ingredients against heating, medicine against meals. The grave was empty in the yard, but it lived in their voices, the grave of the future they had imagined for their son, buried under receipts and potion bottles and contingency plans. Beyond their walls, the world sensed something wrong without knowing its name. Mothers pulled their children a little closer when Remus approached, apologizing with tight smiles, inventing urgent errands. His own parents invented illnesses for him with the same desperate creativity, explaining away his absences with fevers that never quite resolved. Infections that always seemed to flare near the full moon. Invitations dried up, sleepovers became impossible. Birthdays were family only because how could you lock another child in a house with a werewolf and still call yourself a parent? Remus learned the word monster by degrees. Not from a book, but from overheard conversations through thin walls, from healers who spoke over him and around him, referring to the case and its progression as though the small, shaking body on the bed were a replica and not a child. His father's guilt curdled into a fierce overprotection that felt, to a clever boy, very much like confirmation. If your own father flinches when you reach for him on certain nights, what conclusion do you draw? That the safest thing you can do for others is to stay away. So he retreated into the only spaces that did not recoil, pages and thoughts. Books became his first real companions, their stories a kind of counter-magic against the one that had ruined him. He developed a dry, self-deprecating humor early, an armor that let him speak first against himself so no one else would have to. He watched people closely, learning to read the smallest shifts in expression, because every new acquaintance was a risk assessment. Every potential friendship a silent calculation of doors, windows, and exit routes. This is important. The very skills that would later make him a brilliant teacher and a painfully cautious friend were born here, in a childhood where love had to share space with fear. And above it all, like a star he could see but never touch, there was Hogwarts. Letters from distant magical relatives spoke of moving staircases and feasts, of houses and Quidditch, and a castle that felt like the opposite of a cellar. Remus listened, nodded, asked careful questions, and quietly assumed he would never go. How could a school full of children ever accept a monster in their midst? Not Dumbledore, who had once barred the gates to his kind, not Hagrid, who had been expelled for a danger he did not truly pose. Not Sirius, who had not yet met him, but whose life would one day orbit his. The story, he thought, was already written. Hogwarts was for other children. His plan was simple. Survive, stay hidden. Do no harm. He did not yet know that far away, a headmaster was sketching blueprints for a house that screamed, a tree that attacked, and a secret tunnel carved for one boy alone. He did not yet know that the castle he had exiled himself from in his imagination was quietly, inexorably, being rebuilt around him. The next full moon would not change that. But the first letter would. The first letter did not arrive on a stormy night. It came on a morning so ordinary it had almost given up on being a day at all. Grey light. Cold tea. The quiet scrape of cutlery in a house that had learned to speak only between full moons. Remus sat at the table, thin wrists resting on the wood, counting the days until the next transformation the way other boys counted down to holidays. He knew the rhythm now. Pain, recovery, silence, that was the whole story. Or so he thought, until the tawny owl slammed into the window with a thud that sounded, for one suspended heartbeat, like the world changing its mind. The envelope was heavy, cream unmistakable. The Hogwarts crest burned against the dull morning like a small impossible sun. Lyle froze. Hope flared first, wild and reflexive, before terror drowned it. His wife's hand went to her mouth. They had been told again and again that this could not happen. This is important. Ministry healers had been clear. A bitten child was to be kept apart. No school, no other children, no chances. Regulations that read like a sentence couched in the careful language of public safety and quiet shame. Lyle himself had repeated those rules as penance for the night he had called werewolves monsters, for the revenge that had followed in Fenrir Greyback's teeth. He had built their lives around that conviction. Keep the boy hidden, keep everyone else safe. And yet the letter lay between them, heavy as a grave marker and twice as defiant. They argued in low, frantic voices while Remus stared at his name written in emerald ink, as if by staring hard enough he might become the kind of child who deserved it. Then the second impossibility arrived, not by owl, but by knock. Albus Dumbledore stepped into their small sitting room as though he had always been expected. Calm, unhurried. The kind of quiet that did not come from ignorance of danger, but from having looked at it for a very long time. He spoke of Hogwarts as if it were not just a castle, but a promise, stone corridors, floating candles, a place where magic could be learned rather than feared. Then he described the plan. A house on the edge of Hogsmeade that would scream when the moon rose. A tree planted on the grounds whose very branches would attack to keep curious students away. A secret tunnel carved through earth and rock. A private road for one boy to walk from school to solitude and back again. No other student would be harmed, Dumbledore said. The transformations would be contained. The risk would be his. It sounded like a fairy tale built from bricks and blood. Remus's hands shook when he touched the parchment. His fingers traced the crest as if it might vanish, a replica that would crumble under too much pressure. He studied Dumbledore's face, searching for pity, for revulsion, for the flinch he had learned to anticipate. It did not come. Not Dumbledore, who had already begun to bend the architecture of Hogwarts itself around the fragile fact of one cursed child. In that moment, Remus understood something that would shape the rest of his life. An adult in power was willing to rewrite the rules to make room for him. The grave of his old future was empty. The story was not over. But if Dumbledore could rearrange trees and houses and laws for one boy, what else could he rearrange? What other truth could he bury under protections and half-told stories until even Remus could not see the lies tightening around his friends' names? The grave of his old future was empty, but something else was being built in its place. Not a monument, a mechanism. Mercy translated into architecture and moving branches and stone. Remus's first journey to Hogwarts unfolded like every other first year's, and yet not like theirs at all. The Black Lake, the lanterns swinging from the little boats, the castle rising in tiers of light above the water, every window a promise that learning and laughter and ordinary magic were waiting on the other side of the shore. He watched other children point and whisper and lean into one another. He watched the reflections of the towers shiver in the dark water, and beneath the awe he knew that once a month he would vanish from that light, swallowed by a house that existed for one purpose only, to hold his suffering where no one could see. This is important. Hogwarts did not simply accept a werewolf, it re-engineered itself around the problem of his body. The Whomping Willow was planted as a living guard dog, its violence a public spectacle that disguised a private function. Beneath its roots, Dumbledore had ordered a tunnel carved, narrow and secret, the earth packed tight around it like a grave that never quite closed. At the far end stood the Shrieking Shack on the edge of Hogsmeade, its walls reinforced, its rooms soundproofed, its windows barred against escape. When the full moon rose, Remus would crawl inside that replica of a home and let the monster tear him apart, while the villagers shook their heads and spoke of ghosts and curses and a haunting that was, in fact, only one boy's body breaking itself again and again. He was grateful. How could he not be? No other headmaster would have risked the scandal, the danger, the political cost. Not Dumbledore, who had already begun to gather secrets around himself like cloaks, could have done otherwise and still called himself merciful. Yet mercy, when it must be hidden, curdles into shame. Remus learned the rules quickly. Do not be late to the hospital wing. Do not let anyone see the pattern of your absences. Do not give your friends a reason to ask why you smell of blood and antiseptic. If they knew, they would be afraid. If they were afraid, you would be expelled. If you were expelled, this brief, brilliant illusion of being simply alive at school would end. His first full moon at Hogwarts came with clear skies. The walk down the tunnel was longer than it had any right to be. Each step carried him further from the noise of the castle, from the muffled shouts of first years in their new dormitories, from the possibility that someone might one day call his name and mean it as a friend. The tunnel air was damp and close. His breath echoed. His heart did too. When he pushed open the shack's door, the emptiness met him like a wall. No healer, no parent, no classmates, only furniture already scarred to splinters in anticipation, as if the room itself remembered what he would do to it. The transformation was always the same and always worse than memory allowed. Bones lengthened and snapped, skin split, his own hands became weapons he could not drop. His screams struck the reinforced walls and fell back on him. Trapped in the village, people pulled their curtains tighter and muttered about restless spirits. In the castle, a boy named Sirius Black turned over in his sleep, unaware that his future would be welded to those screams. The grave was empty. The house was full of pain. And in the design of that system, in the way one child's horror was sealed away for the greater good, there was a blueprint for what would come. Dumbledore would return to these patterns again and again. The hidden cottage in Godric's Hollow, protected by a Fidelius charm. The safe houses of the Order, the headquarters no one could find unless told. He would keep truths from Molly Weasley, from Minerva McGonagall, from Harry, and from Remus himself, always with the same reasoning. Protection required ignorance. Safety demanded that someone be left in the dark. Remus learned that lesson first in wood and stone. His life at Hogwarts would be divided into two realms: the bright halls, where he was almost a boy, and the shack, where he was entirely a monster. Years later, when he stood in other hidden rooms, when he was told only part of a plan and asked to trust the rest, some quiet part of him would recognize the architecture. He had walked this tunnel before. He had howled inside its walls. He knew, more than most, what it cost to be the secret at the center of someone else's strategy. And when James and Lily's cottage exploded under another secret charm, when the world declared them dead and buried, Remus would accept the story without question. Of course there were things he had not been told. Of course there were protections that required his exclusion. It was, after all, the way Hogwarts had first taught him to survive. Hogwarts did not simply exclude him. It taught him the price of being included on someone else's terms. This is important. Remus stepped onto the stone floors of Gryffindor Tower, already rehearsing how to take up as little space in the world as possible. Then the door to his dormitory opened, and the future of his life was sitting on 4 mismatched beds. James Potter was the first gravitational pull. All restless energy and Quidditch posters, wand flicking in his fingers as if magic were an extension of his own impatience. He spoke in plans: next match, next prank, next daring rescue of some first year from Peeves. Sirius Black lounged as though the room belonged to him by blood right, an heir without a throne. Aristocratic drawl wrapped around a rebellion so sharp it almost cut the air. Peter Pettigrew laughed too quickly, agreed too easily, his eyes darting between them as if measuring the distance to the nearest center of gravity. And in the corner, Remus unpacked his books with careful, almost reverent hands. A quiet boy with a grave secret and scars he never explained. He made himself useful instead of visible. He straightened trunks after James's explosive searches for a missing snitch. He reminded Sirius of homework deadlines and quietly handed Peter completed notes when the other boy fell behind. When the moon began to carve its cycle into his timetable, he volunteered for prefect-like tasks long before the badge would ever touch his chest. Escorting first years, running messages for professors, any errand that gave him plausible reasons to vanish. The excuses were flimsy. Sick mother, library project, sudden migraines that arrived with calendar precision. He knew they were flimsy. He depended on the fact that boys intoxicated with youth and freedom would not look too closely. But Hogwarts has a way of binding people through shared punishment as much as shared triumph. Detentions piled up, James and Sirius for hexing in the corridors, Peter for following them, Remus for being there and not quite managing to talk them out of it. They polished trophies together. The clang of metal and the smell of polish wrapping around whispered conversations about family, fear, and the war that was already darkening the edges of their childhood. In those long nights, something eroded. Not Dumbledore, who had arranged secret passages and a shrieking shack as if Remus were a dangerous artifact to be stored. Not Hagrid, who had carried other children on his shoulders at feasts. It was these three boys who looked at Remus and saw not a problem to be contained, but a mind they trusted. They began to ask his opinion on pranks, and he found himself offering improvements, safeguards, escape routes. His moral compass did not stop the mischief, it refined it. If James was the spark and Sirius the flame, Remus became the one who made sure the fire did not burn the wrong people. Mischief needed a name. Identity demanded a banner. Four boys with a stolen bit of parchment and an obsessive fascination with every hidden archery of the castle began to map Hogwarts from the inside out, turning stone and secret into ink and intention. The Marauders. It sounded grand, ridiculous, impossibly alive. The map was more than a charm. It was proof that they existed together, that their story was written into the very corridors they haunted. For the first time, Remus belonged to something that was not defined by fear. And yet, each full moon approached like a question. What happens when they follow him on the map and see his name vanish into the tunnel beneath the Whomping Willow? What happens when the truth steps into the light and the replica of safety he has built with them shatters? The laughter in the dormitory grew louder. The secret in his blood grew heavier. The grave was empty, but something was already dying. The Brotherhood was real. The lie at its center was, too, Remus Lupin had spent years preparing for the moment his friends would look at him and see a monster. He had rehearsed the confession, the apology, the quiet exit from their lives. He had a plan for exile. He did not have a plan for what actually happened. They cornered him in the dormitory, not with wands drawn, but with indignation. James, arms folded, hair a-storm around his face. Sirius, pacing like a caged dog, furious for reasons Remus did not yet understand. Peter, pale but present, eyes flicking between them. They had the map. They had the pattern. They knew about the shack, the willow, the way his name vanished once a month as if he were already dead and buried in some unmarked grave beneath the roots. James spoke first, voice low and offended. "How dare you think we would leave you?" Sirius followed, sharper, almost cruel in his honesty. "Did you truly believe a bite, a curse, a night of howling could turn friendship into a replica of fear and disgust?" This is important, because in that instant, the story Remus had always told himself about inevitable abandonment collided with a different truth. They were not stepping back. They were stepping closer. Then came the revelation that felt like blasphemy against the law and a benediction against his loneliness. Three boys, 16 and reckless, had spent years mastering an illegal branch of magic not to gain power, not to impress a crowd, but to sit in the dark with him. An Imagi, a stag, a dog and a rat, bound to the wolf by choice. Not Dumbledore, who had built the shack as a cage and called it mercy. Not Hagrid, who had carried him once after a particularly brutal night. It was James, Sirius and Peter who decided that mercy without company was not enough. The first full moon with them changed the shape of the curse. The transformation still hurt, bones still snapped, skin still tore, the ancient hunger still rose like a tide. But when the wolf lifted its head, there was scents that did not mean prey or threat. The warm, wild musk of the great stag, the thick, familiar dog scent of Sirius, the quick, darting presence of the rat. They ran. Through the forbidden forest, beneath branches that clawed and wind that roared, the wolf did not throw itself against walls. It chased and was chased, part of a pack instead of a solitary horror. Somewhere inside the beast, a thought flickered. Recognition, joy, the grave was empty where his childhood should have been, but for the first time his nights were not. Yet this new freedom carried its own chains. The curse became bearable because it was shared, because his sense of being human was now braided into 3 other lives. If they were there, he was not lost. If they were not, what was he? When your safety, your sanity, your very idea of being alive depends on 3 beating hearts, how many fractures can that bond survive? The answer would come years later, on another night of betrayal and howling. And when it came, the same magic that had saved him would mark the fault line along which everything broke. The answer would come years later, on another night of betrayal and howling. But before the grave was empty, before the war carved his life into before and after, there was a boy who laughed so hard his scars disappeared. Remus Lupin was not born into joy, but Hogwarts gave him an imitation of it so convincing it almost felt like the real thing. In the Gryffindor common room, long after curfew, he would be sprawled on the rug with James and Sirius, parchment and books abandoned, his head tipped back, laughing. Not the careful, apologetic laugh of a child who knows he is an intrusion, but something unguarded, helpless, alive. This is important. For a few stolen years, the monster forgot to monitor the angle of his sleeves, the fall of his hair, the way firelight caught on the pale lines across his face. On the edge of the black lake, wind worrying his robes and driving spray against his boots, he could almost believe the story that he was simply another student. James would be skimming stones with ridiculous competitive focus, Sirius inventing rules as he went, Peter shivering and complaining about the cold, and Remus would stand between them and the water, feeling the pull of the moon muted by daylight and friendship. He knew the truth of what waited every month in the Shrieking Shack, but for an afternoon, the future could be postponed. Within the Marauders, he became something he had never expected to be, the center of gravity. James's brilliance bent toward cruelty where Severus Snape was concerned, and it was Remus who stepped between, voice low, saying no, not this, not today. Sirius burned too hot, his recklessness a kind of magic all its own, and it was Remus who caught his arm, who said think, who refused to let a joke become a curse. He did their homework when they were exhausted or careless, not out of martyrdom, but because holding the group together gave his cursed life a shape. He was the planner, the quiet strategist, the one with a timetable and a quill. There were small mercies that stitched these years into something like a home. After a particularly brutal full moon, when even the wolfsbane free transformation, softened only slightly by his friend's animagus bodies, left him shaking and hollow, James would wordlessly toss him a chocolate frog, the ordinary charm of sugar and collectible card anchoring him back in the world. Sirius, seeing the way his robe sleeves frayed around scarred wrists, would insist on buying new ones in Hogsmeade, turning the errand into an argument about cut and color so Remus did not have to say thank you. Peter would sit beside him in the library, asking for help with a charm and actually listening. His attention a quiet affirmation that Remus was more than a creature to be pitied. Not Dumbledore, who had built the Whomping Willow system, not Hagrid, who had carried him to the shack more than once when he could not walk, could give him what these boys gave him, the illusion that he was simply one of four. No more, no less. Yet the viewer knows what they do not. War is coming. One of them will betray. One will be framed. One will die, and Remus, who finally believed he was part of a pattern larger than his curse, will stand again at the edge of a different lake with no one at his side. There is a night, near the end of their schooling, when the four of them sit on the astronomy tower roof, cloaks wrapped tight against the cold. Below them, the castle glows with scattered candlelight, every window a tiny promise. They speak in grand plans, in future flats in London, in aura badges and experimental magic, in a world where Voldemort is a name they helped erase. They make a plan for a life that assumes all four will live. In canon, those plans are obliterated by a killing curse in Godric's Hollow. In the story we are telling, they are not destroyed, but distorted, twisted around a single, devastating lie, that two of them died, that one of them murdered them, and that Remus Lupin must survive both the war and the knowledge that the night he remembers is a kind of replica, a future that was never allowed to be born. The grave of their school days was empty. This is important. The laughter did not vanish in a single night. It thinned, it frayed. It learned to lower its voice in corridors where whispers about disappearances began to echo more loudly than prankster shouts. Remus felt it first in the Great Hall. The benches at the far end of the Gryffindor table, where seventh years usually sprawled with a kind of careless, noisy confidence, had gaps now. An older boy who had once praised James's Quidditch feints was simply gone one September, his trunk never fetched from the dormitory. A Ravenclaw prefect left at Christmas to train as an aura and never returned. Professors spoke more quietly. Even the enchanted ceiling seemed to favor iron-grey clouds over stars. Not Dumbledore, who had always seemed ancient and inexhaustible, could quite hide the new exhaustion in his eyes as he surveyed the hall, counting absences like names on a future memorial. The Marauders reacted as boys who believe themselves nearly immortal often do. James and Sirius started treating the war as an extension of a game they intended to win, speaking in low, fierce tones about aura applications, about the Order of the Phoenix, about how their animagus forms might be useful in reconnaissance. It was a plan, and having a plan made them feel alive. Peter laughed along, but his hands shook when he folded the Prophet, when another headline announced a family found in a burned-out cottage, wands still in their fingers. He was afraid, but he was more afraid of being left behind. Remus did not have the luxury of seeing the coming conflict as a simple battlefield. For him, it was also a census, a registry, a set of laws written with his name in invisible ink. The Ministry's anti-werewolf decrees spread through Hogwarts in the form of clippings and muttered commentary, restrictions on employment, on housing, on wand rights. Each new regulation was a charm closing a door he had only just learned how to open. Outside the castle, Fenrir Greyback and others like him were recruiting, promising power and revenge to those who embraced the monster the world already believed them to be. Where was safety for someone whose very blood had been turned into a crime? Dumbledore saw all this. He called Remus aside, not often, but often enough to carve a separate track through his final years. Quiet conversations in shadowed classrooms about certain circles, about the packs that were drifting toward Voldemort, about the value of someone who could move between worlds. The suggestion was never quite an order, never quite a request, but it carried a weight that Remus, who owed this man his education and his fragile semblance of normality, could not ignore. The idea took root that his greatest service might be to walk among his own kind as a sort of living replica, outwardly aligned with them, inwardly loyal to the Order. And with that idea came its poisonous twin, that others might one day wonder if the mask had become the face, if the spy had changed sides, if the line between grave necessity and betrayal had blurred beyond recognition. By the time NEWTs loomed, graduation no longer felt like a threshold into freedom. It felt like conscription. The castle that had sheltered their mischief was becoming a staging ground, its portraits and stone staircases bearing silent witness as friendships hardened into oaths. They would leave through the same doors, but not into the same future. James and Sirius racing toward open conflict, Peter stumbling after them, and Remus Lupin walking more slowly, already half in shadow, knowing that the war waiting beyond the gates would test not only their courage, but the very story of who they believed each other to be. They did not march into war. They drifted almost seamlessly from school corridors into shadowed safe houses, as if the world had simply widened around their old vows. The Marauders had sworn, half in jest, that they would always run together. The war merely gave that promise a grave new stage. Dumbledore came to Remus first, before the others, in a quiet room that smelled of dust and old magic. He did not speak of duty. He spoke of childhood stolen by Fenrir Greyback, of full moons in the shrieking shack, of a boy who had been caged so that others could sleep safely. Now, he said, there was a chance to fight the darkness that had written itself into Remus's blood. This is important. James and Sirius framed it differently when they burst in later, eyes alight. To them, the Order of the Phoenix was simply the next adventure. The Marauders' map expanded to the whole of Britain. Every alley a potential mission. On parchment, Remus's role was the same as theirs: reconnaissance, dueling, guard duty. In practice, his true assignment was spoken only in half sentences. There were werewolf packs on the margins, packs that listened to Greyback, packs tempted by Voldemort's promise of legalized savagery. Remus was sent to them. To talk, to listen, to sit in circles where the firelight caught yellowed eyes and broken teeth, where he was greeted as kin and measured as traitor. He walked into dens that smelled of blood and wet earth, knowing that if his wand slipped from his hand, no one in the room would mourn him. He was never fully trusted there. Too educated, too polished, too clearly shaped by Hogwarts rather than the forest. And yet, when he returned to Order headquarters with names, rumors, and half-heard plans, he found another kind of distance waiting. Some members lowered their voices when he entered. A few flinched almost imperceptibly when his sleeve brushed theirs. Information about certain missions seemed to bypass him as if by accident. The story beneath the silence was unmistakable. He was useful, but he was not quite one of them. Tolerated, not embraced. James and Sirius refused that verdict. They vouched for him loudly in meetings, demanded he be briefed on every operation they were, dragged spare chairs to the table so there would always be a place beside them. Not Sirius, who had once thrown a punch at a Slytherin for using the word monster, and who now used his own reputation like a shield in front of Remus. In private, they told him nothing had changed, that he was as much a marauder as ever. But the war stole time. Long nights on separate missions replaced long nights in the common room. Laughter thinned. Letters went unanswered. The easy camaraderie became another thing rationed, like food and sleep. And as Voldemort's gaze narrowed toward Godric's Hollow, as whispers of a prophecy coiled tighter around a single child, the question of trust sharpened. Who was safe? Who might break? The grave was empty in this future, but the suspicion was not. Remus, already half suspected by some, would soon discover that when the most crucial decision was made, his name was never even placed on the table. He would not know it until it was far too late. He would not know it until it was far too late. For now, there was a wedding. The war did not stop for it. The newspapers still carried names, the sky still sometimes flashed green over distant fields. But for one narrow day in late summer, in a sun-washed clearing behind an old wizarding church, they pretended the world was not closing in. This is important, because for Remus Lupin, that day did not feel like a pause in a tragedy. It felt like proof that the story might still end well. His robes were clean but a little threadbare at the cuffs, charm-mended again and again until the fabric had more repair than original weave. Sirius stood blazing at James's side as best man, laughing too loudly, raising a glass with the reckless bravado of a man who refused to admit he was afraid. Remus lingered at the edge of the crowd, the quiet line between them, watching Lily walk up the aisle with flowers in her hair and a stubborn, radiant calm in her eyes. Lily was a charms prodigy, but that afternoon her magic was almost incidental. The real power in the clearing was simpler, the way James's hands shook when he took hers, the way their friends cheered as if volume alone could hold back the grave that waited for so many of them. Remus felt the weight of the ring on James's finger as if it were a ward stone placed over all of them. They were alive. They were together. Surely that meant the war could not take everything. In those months, his place in their lives was not dramatic. It was steady. He sat at Lily's kitchen table, parchment spread between them, helping her cross-reference obscure protection theories, arguing over whether intent could anchor a charm more deeply than blood. He walked with James under dim street lamps as James spoke haltingly about the idea of a child, of being a father when his own future felt so uncertain. Remus listened, advised, deflected his own loneliness with dry questions and practical suggestions. He believed, with a kind of reverence, that their love was the one thing the war could not corrupt. Then came the pattern interrupt, quiet and domestic. A late evening, teacups half finished, the conversation slipping from research into contingency. Lily tracing circles on the table as she spoke of wills, of guardianship, of what would happen if they did not come home from a mission. Her voice did not tremble. "Would you ever want to be a godfather, Remus?" she asked, half smiling, as if the word were lighter than it was. James snorted, immediately pointing his wand hand at Sirius, proclaiming the choice obvious, inevitable. Remus laughed with them, shaking his head, insisting he was the wrong man, that there were safer options. Inside, he knew the truth he would never say aloud, that no one should trust a werewolf with a child. This is important, because even here, with the scent of tea and parchment and hope in the air, some doors closed when he entered. Discussions of Fidelius' charms, of safe houses, of the exact language in their will happened in low voices behind half-shut doors, or after he had gone home. He caught fragments, Dumbledore's name, a planned secret, the word protections spoken like a spell. Not Dumbledore, who had once moved heaven and stone to bring a cursed boy to Hogwarts, would ever show him those documents. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from a ruined house, would think to ask what James and Lily had written. Not Sirius, who had laughed and clapped him on the shoulder at the wedding feast, would live long enough to tell him what might have been. In canon, the will might as well have been buried in the same grave as their bodies. The grave was empty in this future, but for Remus it remained just as silent. He would never know how close his name had come to being inked beside Harry's, never see the lines Lily drafted and redrafted after he left the room. In our altered story, those unseen preparations become sharper blades. The protections, the secret plan, the choice to vanish and leave a replica of their deaths behind will slice through him with a more personal cruelty. Because when the truth finally surfaces, that they were alive, that they had trusted him enough to almost make him family, and yet not enough to tell him their plan, Remus Lupin will have to face a question far more devastating than betrayal. Was he left out for his safety, or because they never truly believed he could be trusted at all? Remus Lupin will never know the moment that truly damns him. Not the bite in childhood, not the first full moon at Hogwarts, the decisive wound is quieter, a decision made in a cottage kitchen while he is somewhere else, still believing he belongs. By the autumn of 1981, the war has narrowed to a single prophecy and a single child. A sentence spoken in a hidden room has marked Harry Potter for death, and Voldemort has accepted the mark. Every movement of the Potters now is a calculation against a predator who hunts with prophecy in one hand and terror in the other. This is important. Every choice is no longer about comfort or caution. It is about whether an infant wakes up the next morning at all. To survive that hunt, they turn to old magic. The Fidelius charm is not merely a clever ward, it is an act of metaphysical trust. A secret is ripped from the world and buried in one soul, and from that moment the world forgets unless that soul chooses to speak. A house can stand in the middle of a village and yet be as lost as a grave with no name. The secret keeper becomes the only true map. If he dies, the map dies with him. If he betrays, the doors of the tomb swing wide. Originally, the plan is simple. Sirius will hold the secret. Sirius, who has stood between James and a dozen curses, who has laughed at danger as if it were an inconvenience, who has always seemed like the obvious shield. Obvious is the problem. Voldemort hunts patterns. So, in a last desperate twist, James and Lily reverse the logic. They choose Peter Pettigrew, the friend no one would suspect, the replica of harmlessness, and they do it quickly, almost breathlessly, as if speed itself could outpace fate. They tell Sirius. They tell Dumbledore. They do not tell Remus. Why is he left outside the circle? Not Dumbledore, who had once built an entire system of tunnels and trees so a cursed boy could attend school, will admit how much the war has eroded his certainty. Rumors whisper that werewolves are being courted, corrupted, turned into weapons. A captured werewolf could be compelled, broken, used as a living key. Lily was a charms prodigy, and even she cannot design a ward that survives torture. So strategy hardens into secrecy. Dumbledore keeps his counsel. James and Lily keep theirs. Perhaps they tell themselves it is to spare Remus suspicion. Perhaps they fear that if he is questioned, he will have nothing dangerous to confess. To Remus, when he learns pieces of this story later, it will not feel strategic. It will feel simple. They did not think of him. When the Fidelius is finally cast, Remus is not in the room. He does not stand witness. He is not the secret keeper, not the decoy, not even properly informed of the final plan. In that absence, in that carefully constructed ignorance, a grave is dug in his mind long before anybody's fall. The grave was empty, but he will pour his loyalty and his guilt into it for years, never suspecting that the missing invitation, the missing explanation, is the hollow where a catastrophic misunderstanding will take root and grow. And when the cottage explodes and the world says the Potters are dead, what else can he believe but that Sirius Black held the map and chose to open the door? Remus Lupin did not hear the cottage explode. He was nowhere near Godric's Hollow. He was in a safe house whose name he would never speak aloud again, sitting at a rickety table with a map of Britain spread beneath his hands, watching pins creep closer to places that had once been only words. Diagon Alley, Ottery St. Catchpole. Godric's Hollow. The war had tightened like a noose. The circle was closing, and Remus, who had spent his whole life braced for impact, could feel the blow coming without knowing where it would land. This is important. On that last evening of October, he believed he was still part of the plan. He believed James and Lily were hidden under Dumbledore's Fidelius, believed Sirius was out there somewhere acting as decoy, believed Peter was frightened but loyal. The grave was empty, but in his mind the story was simple. The Potters were alive, the charm was holding. The Order was losing but not yet lost. Night fell. The moon was a thin, harmless crescent, a rare reprieve from the iron tyranny of his own transformations. He made tea. He reread an old letter from James, the corner worn where his thumb always paused over the words, "You'll be godfather, obviously." He wondered, not for the first time, whether he would ever be allowed near the child whose life he had promised to help guard. The message did not come by owl. It came as light. A silver cat burst through the boarded window, Patronus bright and breathless, McGonagall's voice spilling from its mouth in a cadence he would hear in nightmares for the rest of his life. James and Lily. Dead, house destroyed. The Dark Lord vanished. The baby, Harry, alive, he did not believe it. The words slid off him like water off stone, absurd, impossible, an insult to the careful architecture of his fear. Then the meaning struck, and the sound that tore out of him was not human. It was low and broken and horribly familiar, the echo of every chained howl in the shrieking shack. Every night when James and Sirius and Peter had come as animagi to keep the wolf from eating itself with loneliness. Those nights were gone, snuffed out in a sentence. He staggered, knocking over the chair, the map, the cold tea. His mind clawed for explanations. Had the charm failed? Had Voldemort found a way around the Fidelius? Not Dumbledore, who had sworn this was their best protection. Not Hagrid, who had once clapped him on the shoulder and said the Potters were the safest folk in Britain. Surely not Sirius, who had laughed and said, "Let him come, Moony, we'll be ready." The next knock at the door carried the rest of the ruin. An Order member, white-faced and shaking, told him the new truth. Sirius Black had been the secret keeper. Sirius had betrayed the Potters. Sirius had hunted down Peter in a muggle street and blown him and a dozen bystanders to pieces. Sirius had been taken to Azkaban, laughing. Something inside Remus died very quietly. This is important. It was not only that his friends were dead, it was that every memory of Sirius Black, every shared joke and midnight run and whispered plan, now tasted of poison. If he had been wrong about Sirius, what else had he been wrong about? His judgment? His worth? The very idea that he could ever be anything but a cursed, dangerous man whom people were foolish to trust? In a single night, the world contracted to a grave he could not see and a prison he could not enter. James, Lily, Sirius, Peter gone, his found family reduced to headlines and hushed voices, his future stripped to poverty, secrecy, and the long, slow work of surviving his own grief. And somewhere in that shattered silence, as Remus sank to the floor and pressed his forehead to the splintered boards, a baby cried in a ruined village, and two unseen figures watched from the shadows, alive, bound by a plan he knew nothing about. If he had heard that cry, if he had seen that shadowed movement, how different would the story have been? The cry in Godric's Hollow fades. The ruined cottage falls away. The war for a moment goes silent. In its place, a small second-floor flat in a street so ordinary it seems to have no memory at all. The walls are bare because he has nothing to hang. The furniture is mismatched, scavenged from second-hand shops and the kindness of people who do not ask questions. In the narrow kitchen there is a table set for one. One plate, one mug, one knife with a slightly bent tip. Every object is a reminder of the life Remus Lupin does not have, of the family that never sat at this table, of the friends who will never knock on this door. This is important. Because wars are remembered in curses and casualties, but the real cruelty often lives here, in the quiet rooms where the survivors go on existing. Remus tries to work. Of course he does. He answers discreet advertisements, presents careful references, keeps his sleeves tugged down over the scars on his wrists. For a few days, sometimes even a few weeks, he shelves books or stocks potions ingredients, his voice gentle, his manner precise. And then someone notices the pattern of his absences. Someone hears a rumor. Someone checks a registry. The conversation is always the same, regretful, formal, edged with fear. They do not say monster. They do not have to. Each dismissal takes something with it. His clothes grow shabbier, the hems fraying, the elbows shining thin. His wand hand begins to tremble, just slightly, from too many skipped meals and too many full moons that leave him emptied out, a man-shaped husk occupying a rented bed. Magic, for him, has always been both lifeline and indictment. Now even simple charms sputter when his strength runs low. He edits his own life down to essentials. No photographs. The few he owns stay buried at the bottom of a trunk, faces turned inward, because he cannot bear James's grin held forever in the moment before betrayal. Cannot endure Lily's eyes looking out at him from a world that ended. He walks the long way around any street with a pram shop. He avoids Quidditch pitches, avoids pubs near the Ministry, avoids anything that might sound like the Marauders in another lifetime. Children's laughter is the worst. A sudden peal of it in a park or drifting up from the flat below, and he flinches as if struck, because with that sound comes James in the Gryffindor common room, outlining elaborate plans for the son he was certain he would raise. Tiny broomsticks, first trips to a Quidditch match, stories told by firelight about the noble and ridiculous exploits of 4 boys and a tree and a shack that howled. All of that possibility now collapsed into a single ruined house and a baby he believes was left behind. He has no grave to visit for Sirius. The grave was empty, because there was never a body, only an explosion and a story that hardened into truth. For Peter, there is not even that, only a scorch mark on a street and a finger in a box, a grotesque replica of closure. For James and Lily, there is a headstone in Godric's Hollow and a cottage blasted open to the sky. His mourning is for ghosts and absences, for people who exist now as gaps in the world, not as names he can speak to stone. At night, the flat shrinks around him. The sounds of the city blur into a low, constant murmur. Remus sits at the kitchen table, shoulders bowed, a cup of tea cooling between his hands until the surface film's over and the steam is gone. Across from him, an empty chair waits, plain and wooden and utterly still. He looks at it as if, by will alone, he might conjure James' careless sprawl, or Sirius's restless energy, or Lily's sharp, assessing gaze. No one comes. He knows, with a clarity that feels like a curse, that no one will ever come. And yet he keeps looking at that chair, as if somewhere, in some other version of this story, the door might still open. Because he is alive. And the living are sentenced to hope, even when hope has nowhere left to sit. He keeps looking at the empty chair. He keeps listening for footsteps that never come. And somewhere not so far away, another child sits in another kitchen, waiting for a knock on a door that will also never sound. This is important. The war ends, the Dark Lord falls, and the world rearranges itself around a story everyone thinks they know. The boy who lived, the ruined cottage, the grave in Godric's Hollow that people visit like a shrine. The grave was empty, but no one knows that. What matters for Remus is simpler and crueler. When the pieces of guardianship are handed out, his name is not among them. Not Dumbledore, who had once built an entire system of secret tunnels and a haunted house just so one frightened werewolf boy could learn magic in safety. Not Hagrid, who had once carried Remus back from a particularly brutal full moon. Not Sirius, who had once sworn, laughing and sincere, that if anything ever happened, they would raise each other's children like their own. None of them put Remus Lupin in the circle around Harry Potter. Dumbledore sends Harry to the Dursleys with a logic that sounds like a plan: blood protection, distance from fame, the quiet anonymity of a suburban grave of a street. Remus is told very little. He is not asked to visit, not asked to watch, not even asked if he wants to see the child of the friend he loved like a brother and the woman whose brilliance once remade the world. Lily was a charms prodigy, and now her son is locked behind a door in a house Remus is never given. He hears the name first in whispers at dingy pubs. Potter, the boy who lived. He sees it later in newspapers, the grainy photograph of a baby with a lightning scar, and feels something inside him flinch. Pride, because Harry is alive. Grief, because James and Lily are believed to be dead. Guilt, because he is not there. Because he did not save them. Because he is still breathing and they are not. Years pass in shabby rooms and odd jobs. He moves through Muggle towns with a threadbare suitcase, taking whatever work will tolerate unexplained absences every full moon. Once, he walks through a neat little estate of identical houses, number after number, each one a replica of the last. He pauses when he hears a child laughing in a back garden, a thin boy with dark hair chasing something invisible. He watches for a moment, throat tight, then turns away. He never knows how close he came. The symmetry is almost ceremonial. Harry grows up with a single story: his parents died for him, and that is the end of it. No Marauders, no map, no truth about 4 boys who once turned a monster's prison into a running joke and a sanctuary. Remus grows older with a different story. He failed his friends, he failed their son, and his penance is distance. Neither of them knows that the lines of their lives are already bending toward one another, toward a scarlet train and a storm-dark sky, toward a shabby compartment on the Hogwarts Express, 3rd year, where an exhausted man with a battered case will sit across from a thin boy with his father's hair and his mother's eyes, and the long orphaned years between them will shudder and begin to break. He sees the castle before the children do. The train curves along the black lake, rain streaking the windows, and in the blurred distance, the towers of Hogwarts rise out of the mist like something half-remembered from a better story. Remus Lupin sits very still in his shabby compartment, hands folded on the battered case that holds all he owns, and watches his childhood come back into view. The lines at the corners of his eyes are deeper now. His shoulders carry the grave weight of every full moon, every funeral he never attended because he had not been invited, every name read out after the war. And yet, as the first lights of the castle flicker against the storm-dark sky, a small, unkillable awe stirs in him. The echo of an 11-year-old boy who had once believed that magic might save him. This is important, because the first thing he feels on that train is not hope, it is cold. Long before the lamps flicker, before the students shiver and draw their cloaks tighter, Remus feels the temperature drop like a memory plunging through ice. The Dementor's approach does not simply chill the air, it peels back the thin protections he has built around his mind. He hears James's laugh cut off mid-breath, as if someone has closed a door on it forever. He hears Lily's scream, high and fierce, and then abruptly nothing. He sees Sirius, wild-eyed and guilty in every newspaper, the replica of Betrayal he has carried for 12 years. The grave was empty, but the loss was not. He could let it happen. He could sit and endure as he has endured 100 other nights. Not Dumbledore, who had given him work when no one else would, is here now. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, is here to shield the boy. Remus is alone in this narrow corridor of time, and he makes a choice. He stands. He draws his wand with a hand that remembers shaking over other bodies, other failures, and he drags a memory of James and Sirius flanking him under the full moon into the light. The Patronus bursts from his wand in a flood of silver, driving the Dementor back. When it is over, he offers Harry chocolate with the calm of a man handing over medicine he has brewed for himself his entire life. In the classroom, that same quiet mercy becomes a method. Remus remembers being the dangerous child hidden in a shack that screamed. So he builds a room where fear is not hidden but named, where a wardrobe can hold a boggart instead of a boy, where they line up one by one to drag their nightmares into the open and dress them in ridiculous hats until everyone is laughing, even the ones who usually do not. Neville Longbottom faces Professor Snape and, with a trembling wand and Remus's steady voice in his ear, turns sneering contempt into absurdity, terror into something survivable. It is not a grand charm. It is a lesson in the simple, stubborn magic of being told you are allowed to fight back. When he speaks to Harry properly for the first time, the world tilts. James's face sits across from him, framed by Lily's eyes, and for a moment Remus cannot breathe. Every instinct in him reaches out to say "I knew your parents," to pour out stories of late-night patrols and stolen toast and the way James looked at Harry's christening as if the universe had finally apologized. But he holds it back. What right does he have, this half-absent ghost, to step into a space that has been left deliberately, cruelly empty? Harry believes the story the grave in Godric's Hollow tells. Remus believes it too. He thinks the boy's parents are gone, that Sirius murdered Peter and betrayed them all, that he himself failed to see any of it coming. To Harry, he is a kind, slightly mysterious professor with a drawer full of chocolate and a talent for making monsters less terrifying. To Remus, Harry is everything at once: the child he did not raise, the life he did not save, the living embodiment of a war he survived by accident. Every time Harry smiles at him, something inside Remus flinches and reaches in the same breath. If James and Lily had somehow been alive, if the grave was a lie, what would that make of his long years of mourning? What would that make of this fragile, borrowed peace between them? He does not know that the answer to that question is already walking the corridors of Hogwarts, cloaked in secrecy and old forbidden magic, waiting for the moment when the truth will shatter everything he thinks he understands. The man walking those corridors is tired. The man who opens that shabby briefcase is broken. And yet the room he steps into becomes, for one brief year, the safest place in Hogwarts. The first lesson is simple: a wardrobe, a line of nervous third years, a boggart that smells of grave dirt and old fear. Lupin stands beside them, voice low and steady, and teaches them to laugh at the thing that would undo them. Robes that are patched, eyes that are not. When Neville's worst nightmare, Professor Snape, lurches into the light, Lupin does not mock him. He bends the fear, reshapes it, gives the boy a small, controlled victory. This is important. The pattern repeats, but never feels like a replica. Dark creatures, yes, but always with structure, always with an exit. Grindylows in tanks, hinkypunks in the marsh, red sparks if it is too much. He does not name his own wolf-shaped terror, yet every lesson is built around the knowledge of what it means to be helpless in the dark. He knows how fear fractures a child. So he builds each class like a charm against that fracture, layering success upon success until even the most anxious student walks out a little straighter. Hermione knows not the whole story, not the scars beneath the cuffs, but she recognizes the depth of the magic, the precision of the curriculum. Lily was a charms prodigy, but Lupin is something else. A strategist of human frailty. She watches the way he adjusts explanations for each student, the way he never wastes a failure, and her respect settles into something close to reverence. Ron feels something simpler. Relief. After a year with a fraud and a year with a monster wearing a turban, here is a teacher who is just a man, and that is somehow more miraculous. Homework makes sense. Exams feel survivable. Even his boggart, that spider with too many legs, becomes ridiculous under Lupin's calm direction. For once, he leaves defense against the dark arts buzzing instead of bracing for disaster. Even the Slytherins, trained suspicion in every glance, begin to yield. They mutter about his threadbare sleeves, his tired shoes, the way he seems to fade at the end of each month. But when he faces down a boggart that has become a blood-soaked dark mark and turns it into a harmless ink smudge on a parchment, even they admit grudgingly that Professor Lupin is all right, but the grave was empty, and he does not know it. Not Dumbledore, who had once offered him sanctuary, not Hagrid, who had once carried him howling to the shrieking shack, not Sirius, who had once run with him beneath the full moon. None of them have told him that the war he mourns is not finished, that its ghosts are still alive and moving pieces on a hidden board. So he teaches. Then he locks himself away every full moon, bones breaking in secret rooms. He wakes from dreams of James laughing and James dead, of Lily's hair bright against rubble. At breakfast, he avoids looking too long at Harry's face, because the resemblance is a wound that will not close. For this 1 year, he is exactly what he should have been, a brilliant, beloved teacher, rebuilding children where the war once shattered their parents. And then the pattern breaks. A name whispers through the castle like a curse he has not spoken in years. Sirius Black. Sirius Black. The name moves through the stone like a draught, and Remus feels the old world tilt. The war is suddenly not finished. The grave is not as quiet as it pretended to be. He has lived 12 years on a single brutal certainty: Sirius murdered James and Lily. Sirius betrayed them to Voldemort. This is important. That certainty is the scaffold that kept him upright when everything else collapsed. If Sirius is loose, then the monster of his nightmares has simply changed prisons. Yet when the Daily Prophet arrives with the Azkaban escape splashed across its front page, terror is not the only thing he feels. There is something else, something smaller and more treacherous, buried like a shard of glass beneath scar tissue. What if the story is not complete? What if there is a truth he never saw because grief made it impossible to look? He does what he has always done. He buries the question beneath duty. He teaches. He watches Harry master the Patronus, watches the boy's magic flare bright and stubborn against the grave cold presence of Dementors. He tells himself that if Sirius is coming, he is coming for Harry, and Remus will be there, between them, teeth and wand bared. Then, one evening, he sees a scrap of parchment change everything. The Marauders map should not exist anymore. It is a relic of a different life, a replica of the castle drawn in ink and mischief and love. When he takes it from Harry's hands and murmurs the activation charm, the past rises up out of the lines. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs, all the names he has not allowed himself to say. And there, moving through a corridor, is a name that should be dead: Peter Pettigrew. For a moment, he thinks it is a flaw in the magic, some echo or stain. But the map does not lie. He knew that as a boy, he knows it now. If Peter is alive, then the grave that holds him is only a story. The grave was empty. In the shrieking shack, the past comes to claim him in flesh and breath. Sirius is not a legend or a headline. He is gaunt, eyes sunken, alive in the most terrible way. Not Dumbledore, who had offered him a place at Hogwarts, not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. Not Sirius, who had once sworn brotherhood in a Gryffindor dormitory, has suffered like this. Remus feels the old bond flare, then recoil. He does not know whether to embrace him or kill him. Then Peter is dragged from his hiding place in Ron's shaking hands, and the room becomes a courtroom. Accusations, denials, the thin, reedy voice of a man who has spent his life surviving by being smaller than the danger in front of him. As Sirius and Remus circle Peter, the narrative of 12 years unspools and knots itself into a new pattern. Peter was the secret keeper. Peter betrayed them. Peter framed Sirius and let an innocent man rot, while Remus sat in cheap rooms and drank himself numb on certainty. In a single conversation, his entire understanding of the war collapses. If Sirius is not the villain, then Remus has spent 12 years hating the wrong man. He has failed James by abandoning his friend. He has failed Lily by not questioning the plan. He has failed Harry by staying away because he believed the boy's godfather was a murderer. The emotional whiplash is almost unbearable. In one night he regains a brother he had mourned, and loses the one thing that had made the loss survivable: the clear, simple belief that there was someone to blame. Guilt floods the spaces where hatred used to live. What kind of man builds his sanity on the grave of an innocent friend? They walk out of the shack with something like hope. A plan. Remus will stand beside Sirius, will tell the Ministry the truth, will finally put the story right. And then the moon rises. The transformation steals his mind, the Dementors steal Sirius, and by morning the fragile, restored brotherhood has already begun to dissolve into rumor and disbelief. The truth is a thing they cannot prove. The world keeps its old story. When he wakes in the hospital wing, Harry's bed is empty, Sirius is gone, and the brief vision of four friends whole again has vanished like breath on cold glass. Once more, Remus is the last marauder, holding a truth no one else will carry, walking through a castle that has never felt more like a grave. The castle feels like a grave now. A beautiful, living fortress of stone and magic that has always promised safety, and yet has never once managed to keep the people Remus Lupin loves alive. This is important. Because on the night everything unravels, it is not a Dementor or a curse that destroys him. It is the truth. Snape sends the truth down the corridors like a sickness, a single revelation, whispered to the right ears, passed to the Board of Governors, to parents who have never met Remus but who know the word werewolf the way they know the word monster. Overnight, his lessons, his Patronus charm, his calm guidance on the train become irrelevant. The story changes with one sentence: there is a werewolf teaching your children. Not Dumbledore, who had personally vetted his curriculum and watched his students bloom, can stop the letters. Not Hagrid, who had known what it was to be half monster in the eyes of the world, can stand between Remus and a fear. By morning, the decision is made. It is not framed as a firing. It is a resignation, for the sake of propriety, for the sake of the school's reputation, for the sake of a fragile peace with parents who sign cheques and wield influence. Remus understands the plan without having to be told. He has always been good at translating kindness into its practical cost. In his office, he moves quietly. The room still smells faintly of chocolate and old parchment, of the chalk dust from the blackboard where he wrote out counter-curse diagrams with patient precision. He shrinks stacks of books into his battered case, each spine a familiar friend, defensive magical theory with his own annotations. A dog-eared bestiary whose margins are full of notes that are almost gentle. A replica Grindylow model in a tank twitches as he passes. He taps the glass once, an apology, then leaves it behind. On the desk, there is a pile of essays. Third-year handwriting, cramped and earnest, arguing about the ethics of dark creatures and the limits of self-defense. He rests his hand on the top page, thumb smudging a line of ink. He will not return them. The marks and comments he had planned in his mind dissolve into silence. What does it mean, he wonders, to teach children that not every creature is what the world fears, and then leave because the world fears you? Dumbledore comes. Of course he does. His regret hangs in the air like smoke. He says he is sorry, that he had hoped this year would be different, that he believed the truth could remain contained. He does not say, "I will fight them." He does not say, "Stay." The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow because of a plan he once chose over perfect honesty. Now another secret he helped to keep has collapsed, and again someone else pays. Remus knew this pattern. He walks into it anyway. In his mind, the narrative writes itself with cruel efficiency. He tells himself he always expected this, that happiness is a borrowed room paid for in advance with future loss. People love him until they remember what he is. A boy bitten in his bed, a man who turns. A risk to be managed, never a life to be trusted. When he leaves, it is with the same suitcase he carried as a thin, hopeful first year, the leather more cracked, the handle more worn. The castle shrinks behind him in the mist, towers fading, windows dimming, as though Hogwarts itself is a charm wearing off. He has spent a lifetime circling this place, always returning, never allowed to stay. And somewhere beyond the gates, another loss is already waiting. Another truth preparing to break him in a way even this has not managed yet. Beyond the gates, life does not resume. It stalls, it splinters, it becomes something thin and provisional, like a charm that was never meant to last this long. Remus Lupin moves through those years as if he is only a replica of himself. A worn copy walking from lodging to lodging, job to job. A clerk in a dingy apothecary for 3 months, until the proprietor notices the pattern of his absences. A translator of obscure magical texts in a cold attic room that smells of ink and mildew, paid in coins that never quite stretch to the end of the month. A caretaker for a graveyard on the edge of a coastal village, trimming grass around names he does not know, listening to the sea and thinking that the graves are at least honest about being empty of any future. His life narrows again, but this time not into war, into waiting. The full moon becomes the true calendar. Everything else is filler. He measures time in healing wounds and fading bruises, in how many shirts he can afford to ruin, in how many landlords he can persuade that he is merely ill. This is important. He begins to feel that his life happens between transformations, not beyond them, that he exists in the negative space of his own curse. And yet he is never entirely cut off. There are newspapers. There are whispers in pubs where wizards think no one is listening. He reads about the Tri-Wizard tournament in a torn copy of the Daily Prophet left on a train seat. Harry's name blazing up from the page like an accusation and a plea. He follows each task in print, fingers smudged with ink, heart pounding as though he were back in the Forbidden Forest, hearing James laugh for the last time. When the grave under the school spits out Voldemort's name again, when Harry speaks of resurrection and murder and a wand raised in a cemetery, Remus knows. The war he survived did not end. It merely paused to draw breath. The Ministry's denial feels familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Not Dumbledore, who had seen a Dark Lord rise once already, but men in polished boots and women with careful smiles stand before cameras and declare that the boy is confused, that the grave was empty of any real threat. Remus watches from a cheap room over a pub, the wireless crackling, and feels the old weight settle back onto his shoulders. He does not rush to rejoin the fight. Cowardice is not the barrier, knowledge is. He remembers how quickly trust curdled last time, how friendship became suspicion, how a single whispered story about a secret keeper shattered everything. He knows what war does to people like him, already half banished, already marked as other. To step forward is to offer himself again as expendable. The pattern breaks with a knock. A message. Dumbledore's handwriting, still precise, summoning him to a house that once belonged to Sirius's family. Grimmauld Place is a mausoleum of old magic and older hatred. Walls soaked in the pure blood mania that helped create the world they are fighting. Yet inside are familiar faces, altered by years and losses, Moody's scarred vigilance, Molly's exhausted warmth, Sirius's haunted restlessness. The Order of the Phoenix is reborn, not in glory, but in necessity. Stepping into that kitchen, Remus feels time fold. He is back in the old war, and yet he has never left it. This is important. The chairs are different, the faces fewer, but the structure is the same. Dumbledore at the center, plans radiating outward like lines on a map, everyone else orbiting. Not Sirius, who had once been the brightest star in his sky and is now a man just out of a different prison, but Dumbledore, who had always decided which sacrifices were acceptable. Remus takes his place without argument. He organizes patrols, escorts Harry when asked, disappears on missions into grey, dangerous spaces. His own desires, stability, companionship, a life not scheduled around the moon and the next catastrophe remain unspoken. Who would he tell? Lily was a charms prodigy, and even she never found a spell that could make a werewolf simply a man. Around him, forces larger than individual will grind back into motion. Prophecies whispered in locked rooms, dark marks flaring in the sky over distant villages, Dumbledore's quiet calculations always 3 moves ahead. Remus feels himself drawn along the old tracks, a carriage on a train whose destination was chosen long ago. He was alive, useful, necessary. But the plan is not his. The story is not his. He moves when summoned, fights when ordered, watches Harry from the margins, and wonders, in the brief hours between full moons and missions, whether there will ever be a war that does not require him to lose himself entirely just to stand on the right side of it. He returns to London as if answering a summons from an old wound. Grimmauld Place is not a home, it is a mausoleum with a front door. The air smells of dust and old magic, of a pure-blood family's dying curse, and Remus moves through it like a man walking through the corridors of his own past. He is older now. Thinner, the scars do not announce themselves, but they are there in the way he sits, the way he hesitates before taking food from Molly's table, the way his hand tightens on the banister when he hears Sirius's mother shrieking from the portrait. This is important, because in this house, Remus is both guest and ghost. The quiet veteran who steadies Harry's shaking world while his own balance is far less certain. He listens more than he speaks. He explains the Order without glorifying it, explains Voldemort without promising victory. Explains James and Lily without letting his voice break. In the kitchen, late at night, the other story plays out. Sirius pacing like a caged thing, Remus sitting, shoulders bowed, trying to knit 12 lost years into something that resembles friendship. They had once been boys who believed they would grow old together. Now, they are men who already have. Not Dumbledore, who had rebuilt his army and moved his pieces across the board, understands what it means for them to look at each other and see the outline of what might have been, godfather and honorary uncle visiting Harry at Quidditch matches, laughing in the stands, instead of planning missions in a house that feels like a grave. The war does not leave Remus at headquarters. Dumbledore sends him back into the shadows, into the werewolf packs that Voldemort is openly courting. He goes because there is no one else who can. He sits by smoky fires with men and women whose eyes flash yellow in the dark, listens to Greyback speak of blood and vengeance as if they were birthrights, and feels the old terror rise like bile. To them, he is never simply Remus. He is a traitor who works for wizards, or a potential ally who might yet be broken. A useful replica of the monster they want him to become. Every meeting is a test of loyalty to a community that has never fully claimed him. Displacement becomes his constant companion. Too old to be a student, too poor, and too marked to be offered stable work. Too moral to surrender to the bitterness that would make joining Voldemort feel like a grim kind of justice. He watches younger Order members joke in the corners of Grimmauld Place and knows this is their first war. For him, it is simply the same war. Resumed, the grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, but the losses were real. James, Lily, the future they had imagined. And the war is not finished with him. He has already buried 2 of them. He has already believed Sirius a murderer and then had him returned like a miracle. Soon, in a room of spinning doors and falling veils, he will lose Sirius again. The plan will move on. The story will move on. Remus Lupin will remain, carrying yet another absence that no one else quite knows how to name. So, when the doors in the Department of Mysteries slammed and the room of spinning planets gave way to stone and shadow, Remus Lupin felt something old and poisonous stir in his blood. Another battlefield. Another child of James and Lily in the crossfire. Another night when the war demanded a price. The Death Chamber was wrong in a way that went beyond dark magic. An echoing amphitheatre, stone seats falling away towards a sunken dais, and on it a simple archway draped with a tattered veil that moved when there was no wind. The grave was empty, and yet the room felt like a graveyard. This is important. Remus knew, the moment he saw it, that this was not a place for the living. Spells cracked like lightning across the tiers. Red and purple and sickly yellow light carved the air, the sound of curses hammering against stone and shield. Harry's voice, raw with 16 years of hunger for family. Neville stumbling, Tonks falling, and Remus moving with the grim precision of a man who has survived too many ambushes, dueling, shielding, always keeping half an eye on the boy whose very existence was the reason James and Lily's plan had ever been born. It was a sickening déjà vu. He had fought to protect James and Lily in the first war, then to protect their son in the second, and now he was fighting for both at once. Because Harry carried James's face and Lily's eyes and the unspoken question of whether any of this sacrifice had ever been worth it. He saw Bellatrix raise her wand, a flash of green arcing lazy and inevitable across the gap between cousins. It happened in an instant and across 12 years at once. Sirius, laughing as he dueled, reckless and incandescent, turned toward the curse with a look that was not fear, not yet understanding, only startled disbelief, as though the story had skipped a page. Then he fell. No body slammed against stone, no broken form to cradle, no pulse to check, no desperate charm to attempt. One heartbeat he was there, alive and moving, the next he was slipping backward through the veil, swallowed without resistance, as if the archway had merely been waiting for him. The grave was empty again. This time, obscenely, there was not even a corpse. Harry ran. Of course he did. Remus's hands closed around him with a strength that shocked them both. He held Harry as the boy fought and screamed and begged, because he knew what it was to chase ghosts down corridors and never find them. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated plans within plans, not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, not Sirius, who had once been the suspected traitor. Only Remus understood that there are thresholds from which no one returns. 12 years he had believed Sirius a murderer. Then a single night in the Shrieking Shack had given him his brother back, a fragile, furious resurrection of trust. Now there would be no revelation, no hidden replica, no charm or clever deception to undo this. Lily was a charms prodigy, but even she had never dreamt of cheating this kind of death. And so, the pattern deepened. James and Lily, taken the night their plan began. Peter's false death, which had stolen even the comfort of righteous anger. Sirius, lost to Azkaban, and now Sirius again, lost to the Veil. Every time Remus allowed himself to imagine a future with the people he loved, the war found a way to erase them and leave him standing in the ruins. The one who remembered the truth. He did not yet know that the war had one more repetition prepared for him, one more grave, one more child of his heart to endanger. The Veil was only a rehearsal. The Veil was only a rehearsal. The pattern was clear. The grave appears, the loved one vanishes, Remus survives. And then, in the darkest house in London, something broke the pattern by simply tripping over an umbrella stand. Grimmauld Place was a mausoleum pretending to be a headquarters. Its very walls seemed to remember blood. The air was heavy with old magic, with portraits that hissed and a family tree that was more accusation than history. Into this walked Nymphadora Tonks, knocking over a troll-leg umbrella stand, swearing under her breath. Hair a violent shade of bubblegum pink that looked almost obscene against the house's funeral drapery. She was irreverent, clumsy, vividly alive. Remus Lupin, grey at the temples and fading at the edges, watched her as one might watch a Patronus in a graveyard. This is important, because from their first shared watch in that kitchen, she refused to treat him as a ghost. She joked with him in the long, sleepless hours, nudging his arm until the corner of his mouth betrayed him and lifted. She would sit opposite him at the scarred table, glance at his threadbare jumper, and a moment later her hair would shift, quietly, mischievously, to the exact same tired brown, the exact same worn grey, a living replica of his attempt at invisibility. It was not mockery, it was alignment. A wordless statement that she saw him and chose to stand beside him in his smallness rather than drag him into the light. Not Dumbledore, who had arranged his education like a secret, had ever done that. Not Hagrid, who had offered him tea and unquestioning kindness. Not Sirius, who had loved him fiercely but always as part of a quartet that no longer existed. Tonks looked at the man who remained after all that loss and treated him as if he were enough. Remus did not trust it. How could he? He was older, worn thin by poverty and war. He carried a curse in his blood and scars on his face that told the story before he spoke. He knew what Greyback had made of him. He knew the way employers looked away, the way parents pulled children closer, to bind someone as young and bright as Tonks to that life felt less like romance and more like a crime. In his private arithmetic, loving her would mean ruining her. But Tonks was a metamorphmagus in more than body, she was stubborn in her soul. She fell in love with him anyway, not in spite of the pain that clung to him, but with full awareness of it, as if each wound were another reason rather than a warning. When he tried to push her away with talk of danger and duty, she answered with a quiet fury. Love in wartime was not a luxury. It was a rebellion. To choose joy when the world had a plan for your grave was a kind of magic no charm could imitate. For the first time since the Marauders, someone was not merely fighting beside Remus out of loyalty or necessity. She was reaching toward a future and insisting that he existed inside it, not as a burden, not as a teacher, not as a survivor, but as a man who could be chosen and kept. The grave was empty in front of him now, for once. The story seemed to hesitate. What if, this time, the pattern did not end with him alone? For once, the pattern did not end with him alone, or so it seemed. For a brief, trembling season, Remus Lupin stood before the possibility that the grave of his own future might be empty, that the story might not bury him beside every other thing he had loved. He responded the only way he knew how. He tried to kill it, not Voldemort. Hope again and again, in the months after Dumbledore fell and the war constricted like a noose, he pushed Nymphadora Tonks away with the precision of a man dismantling a dangerous charm. He cited his age, drawing a stark line between her bright, mutable youth and his worn, threadbare middle years. He cited his poverty, the second-hand robes, the itinerant work, the humiliating dependence on Dumbledore's quiet stipends, and always he cited the moon. Lycanthropy was his final argument and his first. The curse that had taken his childhood, his friends, his career would now take this too. He told her, in a dozen careful variations, that loving him meant living with scars that would never quite heal. He told her that his body was a battlefield, and that no one should be asked to build a home on a war grave. Tonks refused. She refused with a stubbornness that reminded him, painfully, of James arguing with fate in a Gryffindor common room, of Lily setting her jaw over an impossible plan. This is important. She did not pretend the curse was a replica problem that could be magicked away. She simply insisted that danger did not disqualify him from being alive, from being chosen, from being loved. The moment he broke was not during one of their arguments. It was at another man's bedside. Bill Weasley, mauled by Fenrir Greyback, lay pale and torn in the hospital wing, the air thick with the metallic scent of potion and blood. Remus watched Molly weep, watched the Weasleys brace for a lifetime of half-answered questions about what the bite would mean. And then Fleur Delacour spoke. She stood in that harsh white light and said she was beautiful enough for both of them. She said she would marry Bill regardless of scars, regardless of the shadow of the wolf. Not Dumbledore, who had offered Remus a place at Hogwarts, not Hagrid, who had carried him laughing through the grounds as a boy, not Sirius, who had run with him beneath the full moon, had ever shattered his defenses as completely as that single luminous act of loyalty. If Fleur could look at Greyback's work and still see a husband, what did it mean that Tonks had been doing the same for months? What if the truth was that his arguments were not protection, but cowardice? Their wedding was quiet. No great hall, no roaring crowd of marauders, no triumphant end to a war. A handful of order members, wands raised in wary celebration, the air heavy with the knowledge that any of them might be dead within the year. It was a subdued echo of James and Lily's vanished joy, a smaller circle around a smaller fire, but the magic binding them was no less real for its restraint. Remus stood opposite Tonks and felt, with almost painful clarity, how much they both understood the cost. She was marrying a man whose very blood rebelled against peace once a month. He was marrying a witch whose work would drag her to the front lines while he counted coins and calculated potion dosages. This is important. There was no innocence in this union, only choice. Marriage did not tame the moon. The transformations remained brutal, bones reshaping under the cold logic of a curse that did not care about romance. Wolfsbane was expensive. Work was scarce. The Order needed Tonks as an aura, the Ministry watched her with suspicion, and Remus felt, night after night, that his presence was an anchor tied to her ankle as she tried to swim through a storm. He feared waking with blood on his hands and her name in his throat. He feared, more quietly, that he would stunt her life into the narrow corridor of his own limitations. Every bill, every full moon, every hushed argument about missions and safety deepened the crease between his brows. The grave of his self-loathing was never truly empty. And yet, for a moment, there was a home, a kettle that whistled in the mornings, a coat of hers over the same chair as his, laughter, sometimes thin but genuine, threading through the cracks of a war-darkened flat. The possibility of a child began to flicker at the edges of their conversations, fragile as candlelight. If one narrowed one's eyes and ignored the headlines, their life almost resembled something ordinary. Remus, who had built his existence around surviving alone, now moved through rooms where another toothbrush stood beside his own. He went to sleep to the sound of someone breathing next to him and woke to the terrifying, miraculous knowledge that he was no longer the only person his death would destroy. The war pressed at the windows. The moon still rose, but inside, for the first time since the cottage in Godric's Hollow had burned and the grave had been filled, he was not only a weapon or a witness, he was a husband. And against all expectation, he began to imagine that the story might yet find space for a father. He began to imagine the story might hold a place for a father. And then the story answered him with cruelty, not with simple denial, but with a mirror. When Tonks told him she was pregnant, the world did not flood with light. It froze. Remus heard the words as if through water, each syllable heavy, distorted, sinking straight into the old, unhealed place where Fenrir Greyback's bite still lived. Other men, he thought, would rejoice. Other men would count fingers and toes in advance, would speak of names and futures. He counted scars. He counted full moons. This is important. Remus Lupin did not fear sleepless nights or nappies or the awkwardness of being an older father. He feared his own blood. He feared that the magic which had twisted his body every month since childhood would reach out greedy hands toward this child and pull him into the same grave of half-life and stigma. He feared the look in a healer's eyes when they said the word lycanthropy. So he ran. He dressed it in strategy and called it a plan. He went to Harry, Ron, and Hermione with the cool, reasonable voice of a professor outlining a mission, offering his experience, his wand, his knowledge of dark magic. But beneath the rhetoric lay an older instinct: flight. If he was away, if he was fighting, if he was useful, perhaps he could postpone the moment he would have to look at his son and see a replica of his own curse. Harry saw through him. The boy he had taught to conjure a Patronus, the boy who had watched his own parents fall in a cottage and grow up beside a grave, would not permit another child to be abandoned in the name of war. Not Dumbledore, who had left Harry on a doorstep, not Hagrid, who had carried him from the ruins, not Sirius, who had vanished into Azkaban. None had ever heard Harry's voice like this. He called Remus a coward. He named the sin plainly: "You are doing to your child what was done to me." The words struck harder than any curse, because they were true. Because Remus knew, with a cold, surgical clarity, that he stood on the brink of repeating the very absence that had defined Harry's childhood and haunted James's grave. He went back, not in triumph, but in penance. He returned to Tonks's side and waited as the war howled outside and the moon kept its indifferent schedule. When Teddy Lupin was born, whole and unmarked, Remus did not cheer. He exhaled a breath he had been holding since Greyback's teeth met his skin. He held his son as if the slightest pressure might shatter him, as if love itself were a dangerous charm he was not qualified to cast. And then something quieter happened. The fear did not vanish, but it was outnumbered. In the small, astonishing weight of Teddy's body, Remus found a truth that no prophecy had ever offered him. He loved this child more than he feared his own monster. Yet the symmetry was merciless. The boy who had lost his childhood to a creature in the dark now had a son in a world still burning. A war not yet won, a dark lord not yet fallen. The question was no longer whether Remus Lupin deserved happiness. It was whether he would live long enough to build Teddy a life that did not end at a photograph and a name on a stone. Because somewhere, even as Teddy's hair shifted color against his father's sleeve, the next battle was already being written, and the story was not finished deciding how much it would take. The next time the story finds him, the child is gone. The husband is gone. The father is standing in a castle that has become a fortress again. On the eve of the Battle of Hogwarts, Remus Lupin stands in the room of requirement and watches children arm themselves for war. Wands are checked, charms are whispered, hands shake. The air is thick with dust and fear and a strange, fierce resolve. It is a scene he has lived before, with different faces, different names, a different Dark Lord not yet fallen. This is important. The déjà vu is not abstract. It is a physical ache, as if the stone itself remembers. He moves through the room like a quiet ghost, but he is very much alive. He hears James in the way a boy laughs too loudly to hide his terror. He sees Lily in the set of a girl's shoulders as she squares herself to practice a shield charm again and again until it holds. Lily was a charms prodigy, but the girl does not know that she only knows that tonight her magic must be enough to keep her friends breathing. Remus's own life coils behind his eyes in a series of sharp, merciless images. A bedroom torn apart by Fenrir Greyback. Blood on a small pillow. His mother sobbing in the corridor so he would not hear. The grave future his father spoke of in a shaking voice. Then Dumbledore at their door, offering school instead of exile, building a shack and a tree and an elaborate, merciful lie so that a boy who turned into a monster once a month could still learn to read and think and hope. Not Dumbledore, who had designed that plan, could have predicted the Marauders. James and Sirius and Peter, boys who saw a secret and decided to become animagi so their friend would not be alone in his own skin. Full moons with paws instead of chains, laughter in the shrieking shack instead of howling. For a few years, the curse was not a grave sentence, it was merely a fact of his life, offset by friendship and reckless, incandescent youth. Then war. Then the cottage in Godric's Hollow. Then a grave that was not a replica as far as he knew, and a prison in Azkaban that held the wrong man while the right one vanished into rat-shaped obscurity. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, knew the full truth of what that night would cost the last marauder left outside a cell. He walks now through corridors that once smelled of wax and parchment and adolescent dreams. He passes Neville Longbottom by a shattered window, the boy's face thinner, older, his hands steady as he distributes passwords and instructions. Remus touches his shoulder, a brief pressure, a benediction without words. Neville nods, and in that nod is the quiet acceptance of a boy who has already chosen where he will fall if he must. At a turning, he meets McGonagall. Their exchange is almost nothing, a look, a fractional inclination of heads, the shared understanding of teachers who have outlived too many students. No speeches, no drama, only duty. For a moment, he detours. Up a staircase, along a familiar corridor, through a portrait hole that swings open one last time. The Gryffindor common room is empty. The fire is low. The armchairs sag in the same comfortable way. He stands on the rug, where a first year with threadbare robes once tried not to stare at three boys and their beautiful red-haired friend. He is saying goodbye to that boy who believed that surviving the bite meant he would never deserve this room, these friendships, this future. He thinks of Tonks's hand in his, of Teddy's impossible shifting hair, of all the nights he almost walked away and did not. Once he believed his curse made him unworthy of love or family. Now, on this night, he understands something colder and cleaner. The curse gave him time. Time to be bitten and rescued and betrayed and misled, to be cast out and called back, to be loved and to love in return, to hold his son at least once. Time enough to choose. This is the pattern interrupt the war has written into him. He cannot choose whether death comes. That decision was made the night Greyback broke his skin. But he can choose how he meets it. So, when the call comes, when the room of requirement empties into corridors that echo with marching feet and whispered prayers, Remus Lupin does not move as a monster or as a victim dragged by history. He steps forward as a man who has already lost almost everything and still deliberately places his worn body between the darkness and the children in this castle. The grave was empty for James and Lily in another telling of this tale. For Remus, it is not the grave that matters. It is the doorway he walks through now, wand in hand, into the last battle he will ever fight. He walks through the doorway and into chaos. Not metaphorical chaos, not the slow unraveling of a life already frayed, but the pure, blinding kind that turns a school into a battlefield in a single breath. Spells rip the air open in jagged colors, green and red and sickly purple streaking past shattered suits of armor. The floor shudders as a giant's club slams into the stone somewhere below, the impact reverberating up through Remus's boots, through his ribs, through the old scars Fenrir Greyback left in his bones. Outside, on the grounds he once crossed as a boy with a cloak around his shoulders and his friends at his side, acromantulas pour from the forbidden forest like a living shadow, their legs clicking against rock, their mandibles catching the moonlight. The air is thick with dust and screams and the metallic tang of spent magic. This is important, because for Remus, Hogwarts was once the only place that had felt even remotely like a refuge, the only place where the word monster had been temporarily suspended by a headmaster's impossible mercy. Now that sanctuary burns. He is on the front lines because there is nowhere else he will allow himself to be. He moves beside Tonks, their shoulders almost brushing as they take the staircase 2-3 steps at a time, answering flashes of green with shields, answering curses with counter-curses that come not from instinct but from long, weary practice. He pulls a first year out of the path of a hex that would have stopped a heart. He covers a Hufflepuff boy who is shaking so badly his wand hand rattles, Remus's own spell arcing cleanly over the boy's head to strike the Death Eater advancing on them. He duels werewolves and snatchers and masked men who would have called him brother if the moon were full and the castle dark. The irony is not lost on him. He knows exactly what it means to be the creature they think they command. He knows, too, that the only answer is to stand between them and the children who still believe that teachers are shields. Canon gives him almost nothing here. A mention. A name on a list. We are told that he dies, that Tonks dies, that Teddy Lupin will never know the sound of his father's laugh except as someone else's memory. The grave was empty for James and Lily in another version of this story. For Remus and Tonks, the texts leave a different emptiness, a silence where the details of their last stand should be. So we imagine them back to back in a corridor where the portraits have fled their frames, Remus's spells precise and economical, Tonks's wild and bright. We imagine the moment they are separated in the surge, the instant when a curse slips past his guard because he has turned, just slightly, to see where she is. Perhaps his last thoughts are not of the battle at all. Perhaps they are of a dormitory lit by firelight, James and Sirius laughing so hard they cannot breathe, Peter trying to look brave. Perhaps he sees Lily's determined face bent over a cauldron, hears her say his name the way she did when she refused to let him disappear into shame. Perhaps there is a flash of Tonks's hair, every impossible color at once, and then Teddy's impossibly small hand curling around his finger. A life of love and loss compressed into a single heartbeat. When the fighting lulls, when the bodies are brought in, he lies in the great hall among the fallen, side by side with the woman he married in defiance of his own fear. Their hands are almost touching, as if one more inch of courage would bridge the distance even in death. Not Dumbledore, who had once opened this castle to a frightened werewolf child, not Hagrid, who had carried other bodies through other nights, can change this ending now. Far away, in a house warded by other hands and other charms, their son sleeps. He is alive. He is warm. He does not yet know that the war has taken his parents the way it once took Harry's, that another orphan has been written into the long, grave ledger of this conflict. This is the cost Remus pays in the end, not the bite, not the poverty, not the years of suspicion, but this final, quiet absence. The story will say he died in the Battle of Hogwarts. The truth is that he spent a lifetime walking toward this moment, and when it came, he did what he had always done. He stood between the darkness and the children and did not step aside. He stood, and then he fell, and the war wrote his name among the honored dead. But to understand why Remus Lupin is the war's most thoroughly broken casualty, the ledger has to be read from the beginning, not the end. First, a childhood, then a bite. Fenrir Greyback tears into a sleeping boy because Remus's father spoke out of turn, and in one night the ordinary fears of childhood are replaced with a calendar carved in silver and blood. This is important. He loses his place among other children long before he ever knows what Voldemort is. The full moon becomes his headmaster. The scar on his shoulder becomes his house. Then the next subtraction, normalcy to the monthly curse. Every game, every birthday, every invitation is measured against the cycle of his own body. He learns to lie before he learns to shave. He learns to dread the sky. Dumbledore offers Hogwarts, but even mercy has a cost. Anonymity to Dumbledore's secrecy, the shrieking shack, the whomping willow, the quiet, intricate charm work that builds a prison disguised as protection. Not Dumbledore, who had meant it as kindness, ever sits with the arithmetic of what it means to be the boy everyone is protecting, but no one is allowed to know. And then, a miracle. Loneliness to the Marauders, James, Sirius, Peter, and Imagi, who crawl into the grave of his transformations and drag laughter into it. For a few years, the replica of a normal life feels almost alive. Midnight runs, shared detentions, a future spoken of in easy plural. We will. We'll all. They plan a world after the war as if it is guaranteed. Trust to Peter's betrayal, family to Voldemort's attack, hope to Sirius's imprisonment. In 3 days the map is burned, the cottage is ash, the baby is orphaned, and Remus is left with a story that is wrong in almost every detail, yet governs his life for 12 years. The grave was empty in more ways than one. There is no body to bury for James, for Lily, for the Sirius he thinks he knew. Those are the obvious losses. There are quieter graves. Careers he never has because every application form asks for a full medical history. Friendships he never forms because he has learned that affection is a liability. Relationships he ends before they can begin, rehearsing the speech about why it is safer this way until it sounds like truth even to him. Years between wars spent in rented rooms that smell of damp wool and cheap tea, counting coins, counting scars, counting full moons. The numbers are merciless. 4 Marauders. By the end of the First War, only Peter survives, and only by selling all of them. By the end of the Second, all 4 are dead, and Remus's attempt to build a new constellation with Tonks and Teddy is cut short almost as soon as it appears in the sky. 1 wife, 1 infant son, 2 bodies on a great hall floor, 1 child who will never remember his father's voice. The pattern is absolute. Every time Remus builds a life around people he loves, the war finds the load-bearing wall and strikes there. It leaves him as the archivist of vanished laughter, the sole custodian of plans that never reached the page, possibilities that died in conversation. He survives, again and again, not because he is spared, but because he is left. If the war broke anyone beyond repair, it was Remus Lupin, not because he lacked strength, but because the world kept demanding that he live through what no one should have to endure, and then stand up and do it again. The question is not how he died in the final battle. The question is what it means if, in another version of this story, James and Lily were still alive, and Remus was never told. Return to Godric's Hollow. Not the ruined sitting room, not the blasted cot, not the nursery where a killing curse rebounded and changed the course of history. Step outside. Walk past the broken gate, feel the November air settle like ash in the lungs, and stop where the village grows quietest, in the graveyard behind the church. 2 headstones. White, clean, impossibly young. James Potter. Lily Potter. Beloved, brave, the story carved in stone is simple. They died, their son lived. The world moved on. But what if the stone was lying? This is important. Imagine the same scene, the same grass silvered with frost, the same flowers left by strangers who never knew them. Now imagine that beneath those stones there is nothing. No bodies, no bones, no James, no Lily. The grave was empty. Not Dumbledore, who had spoken the eulogies and signed the paperwork and built an entire post-war order on the martyrdom of the Potters. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the wreckage and wept into the boy's blanket. Not Sirius, who had gone mad with grief and rage in a Muggle street. None of them knew that the earth in Godric's Hollow held only carefully crafted replicas. In this version of the story, James and Lily do not die on Halloween 1981. They vanish. They make a plan that no sane parents should ever have to make. A plan that depends on forbidden magic and unbearable restraint. Lily was a charms prodigy, and somewhere in the months before the end, she finds a way to twist an ancient protection. To bind a mother's intention to a lifeless charm-anchored shell instead of to her own corpse. Replicas in the cottage. Real bodies elsewhere, cloaked and hidden by magic that bends light and memory and even grief. Voldemort arrives, casts his curses, and the house falls exactly as the world remembers. The bodies found in the rubble are perfect, warm for a time, bloodied, magically indistinguishable from the living couple they imitate. But they are not James and Lily Potter. They are echoes. The cost of that deception does not fall on the ministry clerk who files the death certificate, or on Dumbledore who builds strategy atop a lie he never suspects. It falls first and hardest on Remus Lupin. Remus builds his entire post-war self on those graves, on the belief that his friends died for their son while he, the monster, survived. His poverty, his self-denial, his refusal to seek joy after the war, all of it is organized around the idea that the best people he ever knew are in the ground and he is not. If the grave was empty, then his grief is standing on air. For Harry, the revelation that his parents lived in hiding would be world-shattering. The orphan, discovering that the story of noble sacrifice concealed a choice to watch from the shadows. But for Remus, it is something colder, a second betrayal layered over the first. First Sirius, then James and Lily themselves, all choosing secrets over the quiet. Steadfast friend who would have followed them anywhere. What kind of magic could sustain such a lie? What kind of fear and what kind of love would drive James and Lily to break the world's heart, starting with Remus's? In the next movement of this story, the charm will have a name, the plan will take shape, and the graves in Godric's Hollow will become the most powerful stage set the war ever produced. The charm would have a name. The lie would need a body. The grave would need to be full. It was called the corporeal echo. Not a glamour, not a simple transfiguration, not some schoolyard trick that could be dispelled with a countercharm and a suspicious glance. The corporeal echo was a piece of ancient magic buried so deep in the restricted section that even most professors believed it to be myth. a ritual designed to call forth a perfect, lifeless replica of a living body at the precise instant of its supposed death. This is important. The echo did not imitate the living. It imitated the dead. In the late 13th century, when witch burnings were no longer theatrical farces but systematic purges, a warlock named Idrun Vel watched his family hunted from village to village. Records were everything then. The Muggle authorities demanded bodies, and the early wizard councils, terrified of exposure, demanded neat, unquestioned deaths. Vel's answer was monstrous and merciful at once. He crafted a charm that could spin blood, hair, and a sliver of soul signature into a corpse that never lived. A body that would satisfy both the pyre and the parchment, while the true witch slipped away into the dark. For a time, persecuted families survived by vanishing into their own funerals. The grave was full, the story closed, the danger past. The grave was empty of truth. But this kind of magic never remains in the hands of the desperate for long. Criminals learn to die on command and walk away from Azkaban's shadow. Pure-blood houses, drowning in debt or scandal, staged ornate tragedies and reappeared abroad with new names and intact fortunes. The Ministry, still young and terrified of losing control of its own records, declared the corporeal echo a class-banned art. Known artifacts were confiscated. References were cut from public archives. Idrun Vel's name was quietly stripped from most histories until he was a footnote only a handful of scholars could still pronounce. Not Dumbledore, who had spent his youth in that same restricted section, ever spoke of it. Not Hagrid, who had shelved forbidden tomes with hands big enough to cradle them whole, ever knew what dust they hid. Not Sirius, who had haunted those isles as a boy looking for trouble, ever stumbled on the one charm that might have saved him from a lifetime of ghosts. The corporeal echo's power lay in its precision and its limits. The replica it produced was not an illusion but matter, blood that could be tested, tissue that could be cut, bones that would break beneath a curse. Its magical signature was frozen at the moment of creation, indistinguishable from the witch or wizard it copied to any ordinary detection spell. Yet it was never alive. It could not think or move or cast. Left on a floor in a ruined cottage, it would cool, stiffen and decay like any other body until there was nothing left but bone and the certainty that someone had died. Lily was a charms prodigy, and James had grown up on stories of obscure family magics and half-remembered rituals. If, in those final months, they found a way to reconstruct Idrun Vel's forbidden work, to weave an echo from blood and terror and intent, then Godric's Hollow could hold two convincing corpses while the real Potters stood unseen in the smoke. Convincing enough to fool the Ministry's examiners. Convincing enough to fool Dumbledore. Convincing enough to fool Remus Lupin, who would kneel beside those bodies and believe with all his fractured heart that his last true friends were gone. And if the world believed the Potters lay in their grave, their hidden war could truly begin. Lily Evans Potter was not merely brave. She was brilliant. This is important. The story has so often reduced her to a silhouette in a doorway, arms spread, a mother-shaped shield between a wand and a crib. But before she was a martyr, she was a mind. Lily was a charms prodigy, the kind of witch Slughorn praised not just for power, but for precision, for the way her spellwork held like architecture rather than fireworks. She corrected textbooks under her breath. She annotated margins with improvements. She argued, quietly but relentlessly with any suggestion that the world's cruelties were fixed points rather than problems to be solved. As the war tightened around the Potters, that instinct did not fade. It sharpened. The prophecy had turned their son into a target. The Fidelius had turned their home into a secret dependent on a single, fallible soul. At first, Lily followed the expected path: stronger wards, more complex concealment, layers of defensive magic braided around Godric's Hollow. Then, when Harry cried in the night and James slept with his wand under his pillow, she began to understand that walls were not enough. So she went back to the only sanctuary she had ever trusted: shelves and parchment and ink. Late nights in the Hogwarts library when Dumbledore summoned her under pretexts of consultation. Later, in his private collections, where the air tasted of dust and old decisions, she hunted for something more than hiding. What magic endures after the caster has fallen? What protection could outlive her body, her wand, her name? She found it not in a grand chapter, but in the footnotes. Half-erased references in a 7th century compendium of forbidden charm work. Censored pages where the title had been sliced away but the marginalia remained, a cramped hand noting, replica indistinguishable, ministry horrified. A single phrase underlined twice in rust-brown ink, corporeal echo. The spell was never explained fully. It was only implied in horror and in admiration. A charm that could call a body out of nothing but pattern and intention. A convincing corpse where no death had yet occurred. The grave was empty, the note warned, yet the examinations agreed. Lily read that line 3 times, her fingers shaking over the parchment, and felt the first outline of a thought so terrible she could not yet name it aloud. She did not want to die for Harry, not if there was a way to live for him instead. But what if the only path to that future was through a perfect lie? What if the safest place for her family was in a world that believed they were already in the ground? Slowly, meticulously, she began to sketch a different plan. Not Dumbledore, who had spoken of noble sacrifice. Not Sirius, who had spoken of glorious last stands. Lily traced diagrams where her own death became an illusion. A corporeal echo in a ruined cottage while she remained alive in the shadows, her magic re-engineering sacrificial protection so that intent, not blood on stone, anchored the shield around her son. In those secret hours, Lily ceased to be a future portrait in a headmaster's office and became something far more dangerous, an architect of absence, designing a world in which her grave, and James's, would be monuments to a lie. And somewhere, far from those shelves, a young werewolf who loved them both had no idea that the plan forming in Lily's ink would one day break him more completely than any full moon ever had. But before that ink could harden into a plan, it had to pass through one more crucible. James Potter. To the world, James was simple to read. The Quidditch star with wind-tangled hair and a grin that refused to learn caution. The prankster who turned corridors into battlegrounds of laughter, who faced detentions, duels, and eventually Death Eaters with the same reckless, almost theatrical bravado. In the Gryffindor common room, in Order safe houses, he made danger into a story told in advance. Already half a joke. Remus knew that version of James. Sirius knew him even better. They knew the boy who would walk into the shrieking shack with a werewolf and call it friendship. The man who would volunteer for the riskiest missions and then downplay the scars. This is important. because the pattern of James's life to everyone watching was always the same. See the threat, charge it head on, wand out, chin up. Lily saw something different. In Godric's Hollow, when the house was quiet and the Fidelius felt less like protection and more like a noose, she watched James pace the floor with Harry pressed against his chest, counting his son's breaths under his own. She watched him read and reread Dumbledore's letters until the parchment softened at the folds, tracing every mention of prophecy, every rumor of Voldemort's movements, as if the right combination of words might let him stand between the Dark Lord and that crib forever. The pattern interrupt came at the kitchen table. No battlefield, no wandlight. Just Lily, the parchment from the library, and the word she could barely force past her teeth, replica. She laid out the corporeal echo, the charm that would build bodies from blood and memory, that would lie in a grave and convince the world that James and Lily Potter were dead. Lily was a charms prodigy, and the magic in her description was meticulous, terrifying in its precision. James listened. Then he pushed back from the table as if the wood had burned him. Faking their deaths felt like treason. Against the Order, against the friends who had followed him into every mad scheme since they were 11. Against Remus, who would wake one morning to a world where his last, best pack was gone. Against Sirius, who would have to carry a secret that could not be shared, who would have to look at a grave and know the grave was empty. Cowardice, James called it at first. To run. To hide while others fought. To let Remus grieve a lie and let Sirius shoulder a burden that might break him. The plan did not only protect Harry, it weaponized love, turned trust into a blade aimed at their own. But the prophecy did not care about his pride. The war did not pause for his ideals. Alone with Lily, with Harry's fingers wrapped around his thumb, he understood the colder truth there might not be another way to keep his son alive long enough to grow up hating him for this. James Potter agreed to die. Not in a blaze of glory at the top of the stairs, wand raised against Voldemort, but in paperwork, in whispers, in a charm that would make his absence indistinguishable from death. He chose a different courage, to let the world believe the worst of him, to let Remus shatter, to let Sirius drown in silence, if it meant one small boy would live to see a sky without this war. And when the night finally came, James walked toward his own false grave with open eyes, already carrying the weight of the friends he was about to betray for love. The false grave in Godric's Hollow was only half the story. The real divide was not between life and death, but between those who knew the grave was empty and those who would spend years grieving over soil that had never touched James and Lily Potter's skin. On one side stood the visible tragedy, the ruined house, the shattered nursery, the replicas of their bodies pulled from the wreckage under Dumbledore's silent direction. On the other side, a smaller, colder reality, a handful of witches and wizards who understood that the charm Lily had perfected had done something worse than kill. It had created a world where the Potters were alive and unreachable, present and yet forever absent. The inner circle was brutally small. Lily and James, obviously bound to the plan by blood and by the magic that now wrapped itself around their son. Dumbledore, who must agree to misdirect the Order, to manipulate the Ministry's response, to sign papers and give statements that turned a deception into official history. And Sirius Black, secret keeper in this timeline, the only one who could coordinate the exact second the Fidelius fell with the activation of the corporeal echo, so that Voldemort would see what he needed to see and nothing more. Not Dumbledore, who had once built a secret passage and a shrieking shack for a frightened werewolf child, was unaware of what it meant to exclude Remus. He counted the cost. He accepted it anyway. This is important, because the choice not to tell Remus was not born of diminished love, but of calculation sharpened by terror. Remus Lupin lived between worlds. Half his life was spent among werewolves, feral packs and bitter outcasts that Fenrir Greyback had gathered, places where Death Eaters recruited and whispered. The other half was spent in the Order, on missions that ended in capture as often as in victory. If Voldemort's followers took him, if a skilled legilimens peeled back his mind layer by layer, the entire plan would collapse. One stray memory of a miscast replica, one flicker of James's handwriting in a year it should not exist, and Harry's protection would become a noose. So they left him in the dark. They let the boy who had once howled in the forest with his friends grow into a man who believed every one of those friends was dead or damned. Peter Pettigrew was also kept outside the circle, but for a different, more corrosive reason. Lily was a charms prodigy, and she had watched Peter too closely, had traced the pattern of his trembling loyalties and unexplained absences. His growing instability, the way his fear bent always toward power, marked him as a risk the plan could not bear. Ironically, their attempt to outwit Voldemort still hinged on the one thing they misjudged. They believed Peter weak, but not yet a traitor. And so the cruelty settled into its final shape. The very people Remus trusted most, James, Lily, Sirius, and Dumbledore, would look him in the eye, or send him letters edged with grief, and never once allow the slightest hint that the story of that night was a constructed lie. How do you forgive a betrayal you cannot even name? The war would answer that question for him. One empty anniversary at a time. The lie begins, as so many wizarding stories do, on a cold Halloween night in Godric's Hollow. The grave was empty. This is important. But no one standing in the ruins would ever suspect that the bodies they mourned were made of nothing but light, blood, and borrowed magic. Just before dusk, the cottage is quiet. Harry is in his crib, clutching the battered toy stag that James insists will be his first word. James patrols the downstairs, wand in hand, nerves stretched thin by weeks of hiding. Upstairs, Lily traces the last runic line along the nursery floorboards, her fingers shaking but precise. Lily was a charms prodigy, and the corporeal echo array she has built circles Harry's crib like an invisible second cot, a net of symbols keyed to one thing only: the impact signature of Avada Kedavra. Outside, the Fidelius is already dying. Peter has spoken. The secret has been dragged into the open with a whisper in a darkened street, and the charm that once made the cottage unfindable now frays like old cloth. Voldemort walks through the village without resistance, following the sudden, sharp pull of revealed location. The plan depends on that arrogance. It depends on him coming himself. James hears the gate. The front door explodes inward under a wordless curse. The story, from here, seems to follow canon. James shouts for Lily to take Harry and run, meets green light in the hall, and falls. But the echo is already listening. The first killing curse does not trigger it. The runes wait, patient, for the spell that will be aimed at the child. In the nursery, Lily stands between crib and doorway, heart hammering, wand raised. She begs. She refuses. She chooses. When Voldemort lifts his wand toward Harry, the runic array wakes. The instant the killing curse leaves his U-wand, the nursery floor drinks its pattern, angle, velocity, intent. The spell skids sideways, diverted by a lattice of sacrificial magic that has been primed with Lily's blood and James's hair, and in that same moment the corporeal echo tears reality along a prepared seam. 2 replicas blossom into existence where James and Lily had stood, perfect in every detail down to the warmth of their skin and the fading echo of their last thoughts. The real James and Lily are yanked, gasping, into a warded pocket of space layered beneath the cottage foundations, disillusioned and silenced, pressed flat against stone. Voldemort sees none of this. He sees 2 bodies that look, feel, and read as James and Lily Potter. His magic brushes over them and finds the right signatures. He hears a crying baby. He casts. The curse rebounds, shatters his borrowed body, and the Dark Lord's consciousness is ripped free, convinced he has fulfilled the prophecy in blood. Not Hagrid, who had arrived on Dumbledore's orders, sees the difference when he steps through the wreckage and lifts Harry from beside his parents' still forms. Not Dumbledore, who had felt the echo flare through his monitoring charm and forced his face into appropriate grief when he confirmed with measured spells that James and Lily were dead. Not Sirius, who had stared at the corpses in the ruins and felt his world end. Remus hears the news in a safe house miles away and never doubts it. The grave in Godric's Hollow receives the replicas with full honors, and the grave was empty of the living. To everyone outside the smallest inner circle, the story is simple. James and Lily died for their son. The truth is far colder. They are alive, bound to a plan that will demand their silence for 14 years. What happens when that silence finally breaks? When that silence falls on Remus Lupin, it does not sound like strategy. It sounds like a door closing. It sounds like earth on a grave. He is in some borrowed room when the news comes. The Potters are dead. Voldemort is gone. A cottage destroyed, a child alive, a godfather mad with grief. The story is delivered in fragments, in panicked whispers and hurried reports, and Remus believes every word because to do otherwise would shatter what is left of him. This is important. Somewhere in Cornwall, James and Lily listen to the same reports and choose with full consciousness not to reach out. In canon, his grief is at least aligned with reality. The friends he mourns are truly gone, the grave is real, the loss absolute. Here, the grave was empty of the living. The replicas lie under carved stone, and the real James and Lily sit in a warded kitchen. Hands shaking as Remus presses his forehead to a cold window miles away and whispers their names into a night that will never answer. Every tear he sheds is for people who are alive. Every sleepless night is spent turning over memories of a stag's bark of laughter, a red-haired witch's exasperated smile, not knowing that those same people are arguing in low voices about whether contacting him would endanger the plan. He stares at an empty chair in some Order safe house and imagines James sprawled there, boots on the table, Lily rolling her eyes. In reality, they are sitting at their own table, listening to a monitoring charm that tracks Harry's heartbeat, and deciding that Remus Lupin cannot be part of their survival. The additional cruelty lies in the way the world confirms his mistake. Not Dumbledore, who had once moved mountains to bring a werewolf child to Hogwarts, ever hints that there is more to the story. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the wreckage, ever questions the bodies he saw. Not Sirius, who had loved him like a brother, is allowed to speak at all. The silence becomes evidence. The lie hardens into truth. And yet, magic is rarely perfect. Perhaps years later, on some forgotten road, he encounters a silver stag Patronus in the distance, too controlled, too deliberate to be a wild echo of memory. Perhaps he hears in a pub in Devon of a red-haired witch seen only on market days who never gives her name. He dismisses it. He must. Because what is the alternative? That Lily was a charms prodigy, that James was reckless and brilliant, that they devised a forbidden charm and a perfect plan, and simply did not include him? When he teaches Harry, he believes he is honoring the dead. Each story of James's Quidditch glory, each quiet assurance that Lily's love saved him, is offered as a memorial. In truth, he is maintaining the cover of their deception, reinforcing the myth that keeps them hidden and Harry alone. This is important. If he ever learns, years later or in some impossible afterlife, that the grave was empty and the silence chosen, what apology could suffice? What explanation could stand against decades of deliberate grief? Lily Evans Potter did not vanish out of cowardice. She vanished with a plan. A mother's plan sharpened into a weapon. She looked at the war and did the arithmetic that no one else could bear to write down. Voldemort hunted them. Their lives, their marriage, their very bodies had become leverage against a child who could not yet walk. If she and James remained alive and visible, Harry would forever be a hostage to their survival. If they died, if the world saw a ruined cottage and a grave and a story of noble sacrifice, then the boy who lived became untouchable myth instead of negotiable flesh. This is important. Lily was a charms prodigy, and she understood narrative as a kind of magic. The corporeal echo replicas in Godric's Hollow were only half the charm. The other half was the legend, orphaned savior, murdered parents. A curse that rebounded because a mother refused to stand aside. By erasing herself, she removed herself and James as bargaining chips and forced the fractured wizarding world to rally around an idea instead of two vulnerable adults. But every charm has a cost written into its structure, and Lily read that line too. She knew exactly who would pay it. She knew Remus would stand at that grave and feel the last good part of his life go into the ground. She knew Sirius, if the plan held, would go to Azkaban without trial, howling a name that no one believed. She knew the Order, already thinned by funerals, would stagger under the loss of its brightest strategist and its most inspiring duelist. And she knew that her absence would leave Dumbledore alone with a child and a prophecy, free to shape Harry's childhood with the same cold calculus she herself was now embracing. With Remus, the cruelty was intimate. She had watched him flinch from his own reflection, had seen the way he apologized for the space he occupied. The way Fenrir Greyback's bite had turned his entire existence into an apology. She respected his mind, trusted his judgment, knew that when the others roared for blood, he argued for mercy. In another story, he is precisely the friend you tell everything. In this story, she decides his ignorance is safer. Not Dumbledore, who had access to every secret room in Hogwarts. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the wreckage. Not Sirius, who had sworn to die for James. Lily chooses to tell none of them. But the silence around Remus is different, almost tender in its brutality. If he does not know, he cannot be legitimanced, cannot be coerced, cannot betray them by accident when the full moon strips away his control and leaves only instinct and pain. Is it a justifiable sacrifice? Does the protection of one child, even the child of prophecy, outweigh the deliberate infliction of decades of grief on a man already carved thin by loss? Remus loses his parents to fear, his childhood to the curse, his friends to a war, and now in this AU he loses even the comfort that their deaths were honest. Lily remains a hero. Brilliant, brave, terrifyingly clear-sighted. Yet here she is also the architect of Remus Lupin's deepest wound. The grave was empty, but the hurt it created in him was real, and the story of Lily Potter can no longer be told without that shadow trailing behind her light. The grave was empty, but the war was not. It had taken Remus and Tonks and Fred and a generation of children who had learned to cast shields before they learned to drive a quill. This is important, because the moment the killing stops, the lies that were justified as strategy begin to rot in the light. It happens after the Battle of Hogwarts, in the long echoing months when the castle is being rebuilt and the world is pretending it can be 2, Teddy is 3, left in Andromeda's careful, brittle hands. Harry is 19, carrying a wand, a war, and a godson that should have been Remus's to raise. The story everyone knows is simple. James and Lily died. Remus died. The war ended, except one night, sorting through the wreckage of Dumbledore's old office, Harry finds something that does not fit the story. A pensieve, hairline cracked, but still humming with layered, silvery threads. Memories Dumbledore never shared. Not Dumbledore, who had always kept one more secret in reserve, who had sent Remus to teach Harry without ever once hinting that the grave in Godric's Hollow might not hold what everyone believed. The first memory is an ordinary horror, the cottage, the flash of green, the falling. The second is not. James and Lily alive, years later, in a low-ceilinged room that smells of sea salt and potion smoke. Lily was a charms prodigy, and here she is older, sharper, tracing Harry's name in light over a table scattered with maps of Hogwarts and diagrams of Horcrux magic. James stands at a window, reporting Quidditch scores from the Prophet, voice breaking when he says, "He flew like you, Lil." Padfoot would have loved it. Harry staggers out of the memory as if struck. The grave was empty. Or worse, the grave held only replicas, perfect down to the last freckle, while the originals watched from the shadows and let him grow up in a cupboard. He does not sleep that night. By dawn, he knows what he has to do. He goes to the only other person who has lost as much to the Potters' deaths as he has. Andromeda. Together, they open the battered case that held Remus's last things, the one no one has had the courage to touch. At the bottom, beneath threadbare robes and a cracked sneaker scope, lies a sealed envelope, edges singed, addressed in Lily's hand. To Remus. To be opened only if we fail. Inside is not an apology, it is a map. A set of coordinates in Cornwall, wrapped around a single line, "If you are reading this, we are alive, and the plan has gone wrong." Remus never lived to read it. But Harry does, and when he stands on the cliff above a hidden, warded cottage, wind tearing at his robes, he knows with a sick, cold certainty that every memory he has of Remus raising a glass to James and Lily was built on a lie neither of them chose. Inside that cottage, two voices argue in low, exhausted tones. They are familiar. They are impossible. When the door opens, When James and Lily see Harry's face and understand what he must now know, the question that has haunted this entire plan finally takes shape. If Remus had stood here instead of Harry, could he have forgiven them? And if Harry cannot, what does that make of all their sacrifices? So let the room go still. Let Harry vanish from the doorway, the cottage unhappen, the years rewind. The pattern breaks. In this branch of the story, James and Lily do not wait until after the grave is filled and the replica bodies are cold. They tell him before Halloween. They call Remus to Godric's Hollow under a pretext so thin he recognizes the tremor in James's voice and knows, before he even steps through the door, that something is terribly, irreversibly wrong. Lily was a charms prodigy, and the table between them is covered in proof. Diagrams of blood runes, notes on intent-bound protections, a sketched outline of a crib with a ring of defensive magic around it. And, beside all of that, the thing that makes Remus's throat close, a careful drawing of their own corpses labelled not as bodies, but as echo replicas. James talks first. He explains the corporeal echo, the way a 7th century charm can make a perfect, lifeless double that fools any spell, any aura, any grieving friend. He lays out the plan in the clipped, brittle tones of a man trying not to imagine his son screaming in a ruined nursery. Voldemort comes. The curse rebounds. The replicas die in their place. Harry lives. The grave was empty of them, but the world believes otherwise. Remus listens. He has listened to worse. Fenrir Greyback's growl over a child's bed, healers whispering outside a warded door, Dumbledore's quiet explanation of the shrieking shack. Yet this is the first time in years that he flinches like a boy again. This is important. He hears the cruelty beneath the brilliance. Not Dumbledore, who had built secret passages for a terrified schoolboy, had ever suggested turning grief itself into a weapon. Not Hagrid, who had carried him laughing across the grounds, had ever asked him to be the instrument of someone else's despair. Not Sirius, who had become an animagus just to sit beside a suffering friend, had ever hinted that love could be used like this. You would let him think you're dead, Remus says, and his voice is very soft. You would let Sirius think he failed you. You would let the Order bury empty coffins and call it victory. Lily meets his gaze. Her hands shake, but her reasoning does not. She speaks of prophecy, of the limits of any other charm, of how every other road ends with Harry actually dying. James is caught between them, eyes moving from the man who saved his full moons to the woman who is trying to save their son. Remus does not shout. Fury, for him, is a controlled burn. He speaks of honesty as the only thing that ever made the transformations bearable. Of how every month he became a monster, and every month his friends came anyway, and how that simple, brutal truth kept him alive. To choose a lie now, to become the architect of the kind of loss he has spent his whole life enduring, feels worse than any curse. If we die, he says, we die. But we do not become ghosts in the minds of the people who love us. There must be another path. Or we face what comes without turning our friends into collateral. In this branch, he refuses. He walks out into the October air, certain they will find some other way, or die trying, but not like this. And then the pattern snaps back, because in the timeline that matters, no one put those diagrams on the table. He was never asked. The tragedy is not only what was done to Remus Lupin, it is what he was never given the chance to reject. There is a pattern in this story. It is older than Remus, older than the war. It is the belief that breaking one person is an acceptable price to protect the many. Dumbledore lives by it. He withholds the prophecy, withholds the full nature of Horcruxes, withholds the truth of Snape's allegiance, always with the same grave justification: the boy must be shaped, not shattered, until the exact moment shattering becomes strategically useful. This is important. When he finally tells Harry the whole story in that office after Sirius's death, he does it knowing the knowledge will wound more deeply than any curse. He does it anyway, because the plan demands it. Lily lives by a darker variant. Lily was a charms prodigy, and in this branch she applies that brilliance not to a visible shield in a nursery, but to the corporeal echo and a life built on absence. She crafts the replicas, engineers the sacrificial protection, and then engineers her own erasure. She chooses a lie so complete that even the grave was empty of her, chooses to let her son grow up an orphan in order to keep him alive and untraceable. And she chooses, quite consciously, to let Remus Lupin walk through the next 14 years believing that every person he loved is dead. Not Dumbledore, who had once bent the rules of Hogwarts itself to give a werewolf child a life. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins. Not Sirius, who had sworn brotherhood in a Gryffindor dormitory. None of them tell Remus the truth in this AU. They all participate, by action or by silence, in the same cold arithmetic: his grief is a bearable cost. Remus does not share that instinct. In the classroom, his magic is gentle, but his words are not. He tells children that Dementors do not target the guilty, they target the wounded. He tells Harry that what he hears is his mother's dying scream, and does not soften it. When cornered about his condition, he admits it. He names the wolf, names the danger. Steps down rather than hide behind a comforting charm of respectability. His life has been wrecked by secrets, Greyback's attack, the concealed shack, the unspoken suspicion after the Potters' deaths, so he refuses to build his own protections on lies. Here lies the central tension. Is it ever ethical to break someone in order to save them, or to save others? Dumbledore breaks Harry with the prophecy. Lily breaks Remus with the fake deaths. The war itself grinds everyone down to fragments until even mercy feels like another weapon. And yet the irony is stark. The man most damaged by protective lies becomes the one who protects without deception. He stands between his students and the monsters in their curriculum. Later, between Teddy and the war he once tries to flee back into. Between Harry and the hollowing self-doubt that says he is nothing without the scar. He protects by standing there, fully visible, telling the truth. The tragedy is not only what Remus Lupin loses, it is how little say he ever has in the narrative of his own life. How often others decide which truths he is allowed to know in the name of the greater good, and how, when the final reckoning comes, he still chooses honesty over the grave comfort of another lie. So he does the one thing no one has asked of him. He rebuilds himself as a teacher, not as a weapon, not as a spy, as a man who walks into a classroom and refuses to pass his grave of losses on to the children in front of him. This is important, because when Remus Lupin stands beside Harry by the lake, guiding his wand through the arc of the Patronus charm, he is not merely teaching advanced defensive magic. He is taking the single most haunting memory in Harry's mind and saying, "We will not let this become your whole story." He does not lie about Dementors. He names them describes the drowning cold, the way they feed on hope, and then insists that Harry can answer them with something real. Not Dumbledore, who had so often wrapped horror in prophecy and half-truths. Remus shows the monster, then shows the counterspell. He does the same with Neville. In a castle where adults quietly measure the boy against a prophecy he does not know, Remus looks at Neville shaking hands and does not see failure. He sees a child who has been taught to expect it. So he changes the script. He lets Neville choose his boggart's form. He turns Snape, the embodiment of years of humiliation, into something laughable and small. The magic matters, but the lesson beneath it matters more. Fear can be named, reshaped, survived. His curriculum is a map of his own trauma, rewritten so it no longer devours the traveller. Where others would have hidden werewolves in euphemism, he lists them on the chalkboard. Where others would have glossed over in fairy, he explains how to recognize a body that moves without being alive. In this AU, where Lily was a charms prodigy, crafting replicas and shields in the shadows, Remus's answer is the opposite art, radical transparency. No replicas, no stage deaths, no comforting myth that the worst things are unthinkable and therefore unlikely. The war took his childhood to Fenrir Greyback, his friends to Betrayal and Azkaban, his reputation to whisper and lore. He cannot stop the moon. He cannot exhume the truth from a grave that was empty by design. He cannot undo the Potter's plan or the years he spent believing the wrong man a murderer. But he can stand between a child and the dark and say, calmly, "This is what hunts you, and this is how you stand your ground." In every timeline, that is the legacy Teddy inherits. Whether Remus falls in the Battle of Hogwarts or lives long enough to watch his son board the train, Teddy's inheritance is not simply a name etched on a stone. It is a model. You can be broken and still refuse to break others. You can live with the bite, the loss, the lie, and choose not to pass the wound along. The grave was empty, but the classroom is full. Full of children, full of danger, full of choices. And one night, when the war finally forces Remus to decide whether he will remain only a teacher or become something far more dangerous, that choice will cost him everything he has left. But the war does not have to end with a body on the floor. Imagine the same castle, the same shattered windows and smoking courtyards, but a different tally in the Great Hall. Remus on his knees beside Tonks, both of them bleeding, both of them breathing. The din of curses fading, the green light gone, and in its place the thin, astonished silence that follows survival. Outside, the first grey of dawn touches the towers, and they hold each other like people who cannot yet believe they are still alive. This is important, because for once, Remus is not the one left standing in a graveyard of names. He is there when Voldemort falls. He hears Harry's voice, sees the boy's face, and knows that this time the story of the fallen does not include his own. In this gentler ending, weeks pass. The castle is mended in stages, portraits return to their frames, the shrieking shack stands empty and quiet, its purpose finally exhausted. Remus and Tonks move through a world that is still bruised but no longer hunted. And one morning, in a sunlit cottage far from any battlefield, Remus Lupin meets his son properly for the first time. No alarms, no hastily scribbled note before a mission. Just Teddy in his arms, warm and heavy and alive, his hair shifting colours against Remus's threadbare sleeve. He walks the child through the corridors of a rebuilt Hogwarts, past the portraits that watched another boy grow. He stops before James and Lily, before Dumbledore, before the quiet, stern face of Minerva. He says their names out loud. He tells a story that is not cut short by the crack of apparition or the call to assemble. The pattern breaks in an unexpected way, not with an attack, but with a letter. It arrives bearing the seal of Dumbledore's estate, written in a narrow, familiar hand arranged years before. Or perhaps it is a pensieve, unearthed from the headmaster's office, its surface swirling with memories Dumbledore had set aside for a future he was not certain would come. Either way, the effect is the same. The grave was empty. The bodies in Godric's Hollow were never James and Lily, but the work of a forbidden charm, the corporeal echo, refined by the only witch who could have managed it. Lily was a charms prodigy, and she had used that brilliance to vanish. Remus learns the truth without a battlefield roaring around him. He has time to read, to watch, to break. Anger comes first, hot and clean, years stolen. Grief renewed, not only for the friends he thought dead, but for the trust that had been quietly buried beside their replicas. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated the plan and then left Remus in the dark. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruin and never knew. Not Sirius, who had died without ever learning that the worst night of his life had been built on a lie. Yet there is space now for something else to grow alongside the fury. He sees Harry laughing with Teddy in the Great Hall. He walks the grounds of a Hogwarts no longer under siege. He traces the chain of events in that pensieve and understands with a scholar's precision and a friend's desolation how this deception shaped the war's end. Forgiveness is not immediate. It is not simple. But it is possible. Years later, he stays. He chooses the classroom over the battlefield, the lesson over the duel. He walks the corridors with Teddy at his side, pointing out where a tree once thrashed for a frightened boy's sake, where 4 friends once ran under the moon. The castle is peaceful, the air clear of the metallic taste of fear. And at last, Remus Lupin allows his life, so long defined by loss, to become a place where healing is not a rumor, but a choice. He does not end as a warrior on a battlefield. He ends as a man walking school corridors with his son choosing at last to live. This is important, because when we look back, we see the whole arc. A child bitten in a petty act of revenge, Fenrir Greyback sinking his teeth into a boy to punish a father's words. A student smuggled into Hogwarts by Dumbledore's private mercy, hidden in a shack that howled at the moon. A friend lifted out of isolation by 3 boys who broke the law to become animagi, who turned the grave silence of his transformations into running, laughter, and hooves on forest floor. Then the war tightens. The Marauders become soldiers. The cottage in Godric's Hollow becomes a target, a point on a map in someone else's plan. Remus leaves on missions and returns to news of a grave, a betrayal, a friend who has supposedly murdered another. He believes the story everyone is given: James and Lily dead, Peter in pieces, Sirius the traitor. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated protections and secrets, tells him otherwise. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, thinks to question the bodies beneath the marble. The grave was empty, but Remus Lupin never knows. In canon, that ignorance is already a cruelty. In this alternate world, it becomes the knife that defines his life. Lily was a charms prodigy, and her corporeal echo does exactly what it was designed to do. A replica body, a replica death, a replica certainty for everyone left behind. Remus is not only a casualty of war, he is a casualty of his friends' mercy. Their choice to stay alive for Harry demands that they let Remus's grief be real, even though its cause is partially constructed. What does it mean to protect someone with a lie that shatters another? Where is the line between necessary deception and unforgivable abandonment? The ethics of war in this story are not written on battlefields, but in living rooms, in letters never sent, in a werewolf who sits alone and assumes he was not trusted. The charm that saves Harry condemns Remus to years of poverty, self-doubt, and self-denial, because he believes he failed the people who in truth are watching from the shadows. And yet, when he returns to Hogwarts, he teaches. He gives children the tools he never had, a Patronus against Dementors, chocolate against despair, the quiet reassurance that monsters can be more than their curse. He marries, doubts, runs, returns, and finally becomes a father whose story mirrors Harry's and refuses to repeat it. Harry grows up believing his parents are dead. Teddy grows up knowing his werewolf father chose him even if the war took him away. Through Remus, familiar figures fracture and deepen. Lily is not only a martyr, but an architect of unbearable trade-offs. James is not only a reckless hero, but a strategist who accepts that one friend's heart must break to keep a child alive. Dumbledore is not only a wise mentor, but a man who lets the lie stand because it serves the larger design. Remus Lupin in this telling is the emotional ledger where all those choices are tallied. He is more than the sad werewolf professor. He is the measure of the war's human cost. And he leaves us with a final lesson that reaches beyond magic and replica graves. Sometimes the bravest act is not to die spectacularly, but to keep showing up. To walk into a classroom when you feel empty. To hold a child when you are afraid of what you are. To tell the truth at last when lies would be easier. In our world, as in his, heroism is often nothing more and nothing less than that daily, stubborn decision to love anyway. And so we return to him. A dim room. A battered suitcase. A man alone. It is the same image with which this story began. But it is not the same room anymore, because now every shadow is crowded. James laughing on a broom in a memory he will never see again. Lily bent over parchment, eyes alight with the forbidden charm that will rewrite a war. A crib in Godric's Hollow. A cottage. A grave. The grave was empty, but the absence did not feel like mercy to the boy who grew up believing that everyone he loved died without him. This is important, because when Remus Lupin sits on that narrow bed and folds another shirt with careful, tired hands, he is not merely a shabby professor between terms. He is the child Fenrir Greyback mauled for spite. He is the teenager who howled in the shrieking shack while the whomping willow thrashed above him, believing that isolation was the only way to keep others alive. He is the young man who watched his friends become animagi so he would not be a monster alone. War took that fragile salvation from him. First the Potters, then Sirius, then Peter's false death, then the slow erosion of reputation as the word werewolf became a verdict rather than a condition. In this AU, it takes something more subtle, and perhaps more cruel. It takes the truth. Not Dumbledore, who had built an entire secret architecture of safety around Remus's school years, ever told him that the two people whose deaths shattered him were still alive, still fighting, still choosing a plan in which his grief was an acceptable cost. Here lies the paradox. The war strips him of childhood, friends, stability, even the chance to raise his own son, and yet what lingers in memory is not his suffering. It is the steady hand on Harry's shoulder during a Dementor lesson. It is the wry humour over chocolate on a train. It is the way he steps between children and monsters, including the one he believes lives in his own skin. How can a life so defined by loss leave behind an impression of such gentleness? The alternate universe haunts precisely because it does not cheapen anyone's love. Lily was a charms prodigy, and her brilliance in crafting the corporeal echo and its replicas does not make her love for Harry less real. James's willingness to vanish into a Muggle bookshop and a quiet hidden war does not make him a lesser father. Their grave in Godric's Hollow remains a symbol, even if the bodies beneath were never theirs. Yet imagining them alive in the margins forces us to look at the collateral damage stamped into Remus's soul. Protection for a child meant abandonment for a friend. What do we do with that? We sit with it. We let ourselves feel admiration for Lily's incandescent intellect and simultaneous anger that Remus was left to drown in a grief that did not need to exist. We hold gratitude for Dumbledore's strategies and sorrow that his chessboard required a boy and then a man to grow up believing he was always the expendable piece. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, not Sirius, who had rotted in Azkaban, not anyone, was allowed to break the silence that kept Remus in the dark. There is no clean resolution here, no charm to untangle the knot. Remus does not get his childhood back, or the years with James and Lily, or the chance to raise Teddy. The war ends, the Dark Lord falls, the plan succeeds, and still the teacher with the battered suitcase is gone. And yet, in that dim room, there is something like awe. Because knowing everything he has lost, knowing how thoroughly the world has broken him, he still chooses to walk into classrooms and onto battlefields, to stand between children and monsters, to offer love in a world that keeps proving it can take everything. Perhaps that is the heroism we most need to remember. Not the ones who die in a blaze of glory, but the quiet, wounded man who keeps showing up, even when the truth has left him with nothing at all. And now, the question turns outward. What do we do with a man like this, once we have seen how thoroughly the world has broken him and how stubbornly he remains alive inside the wreckage of his own story? The next time you return to the books or the films, let Remus step out of the margins. Watch the way he flinches when someone says the word werewolf. Listen to the silences around James and Lily. The way his voice tightens when he says their names, the way he never asks for anything. This is important. When he offers Harry a hand on the train. When he buys him a bar of chocolate after the Dementor attack, you are not seeing a side character perform a quaint kindness. You are watching the war's human cost, distilled into one tired man who still chooses to be gentle. Look for the small magic. The quiet shield charm he casts between 3 children and a creature that feeds on despair. The way he stands between Snape and a terrified class, absorbing humiliation so they will not have to. The way he sits with Sirius in the shrieking shack, torn between the friend he loved and the grave he believes is full. The grave was empty in this AU, but Remus does not know that. He is living in a world built on a replica, on a lie he never consented to, and every silence is another wound. So ask yourself, if James and Lily's plan had been real, if they had chosen the corporeal echo over confession, Is it justifiable? Is any protection worth leaving Remus to drown in grief and suspicion for 14 years? Could he ever truly forgive them for turning his loyalty into a weapon against himself, for letting him stand over a grave that did not hold the bodies he mourned? This is where you come in. Take this AU and pull on its threads. Imagine Remus in a dim kitchen when the truth finally breaks. The moment he understands that the night in Godric's Hollow was a performance, and that Lily was a charms prodigy who built a sanctuary out of deception. Picture Teddy at 12, sitting opposite a still-living Remus, learning that his parents chose exile over martyrdom. See Lily facing the man she broke to save her son, forced at last to look him in the eyes and answer the question he has never dared to ask: why was my suffering an acceptable cost? Let this be an invitation, not an ending. Write the confrontation. Paint the first time Remus holds Harry knowing James is somewhere out there, breathing. Map the alternate battles, the conversations. The nights when the truth presses so hard against the walls of their exile that the wards almost crack. Not Dumbledore, who had always believed sacrifice must look like death. Not Hagrid, who had carried a baby from a ruined house. Not Sirius, who had rotted in Azkaban. You can decide what happens when the lie finally shatters. Because this channel lives in that fracture point, in the dark space where familiar magic is turned and examined until new truths appear. Every what if, every AU, is another way of asking who pays the price for the legends we accept. If you want more of these deeper, harsher lenses on stories you thought you knew, stay, subscribe, leave your own what-ifs in the comments, and carry this Remus with you into your rereads. And when you next see Remus Lupin offer a frightened boy a piece of chocolate, remember, you are watching a man the war tried to destroy and failed. The least we can do is tell his story properly. The real question is, when the truth finally comes for him, will anyone be brave enough to stand beside him in the ruins of the lie?